Thank you so much, Qafila, for organizing this. And most importantly, as Sheena has already pointed out, the spirit in which this collective has been formed. So, which is and it is very appropriate that we are starting this program on critical writing, because it seems to me that in this barren land of psychology, where almost nothing critical actually comes out critical, in terms of a collective critical effort comes out, particularly in psychology. uh, the effort that Qafila has started, along with their counseling, and this whole idea of taking forward Freud's idea of the free clinic, which is an absolutely not only an excellent idea, but it is an appropriate idea of a critical endeavor. Why is it so? Is something hopefully we'll be able to shed some light on by the end of our discussions and all of that. But so my really I'm really happy, as well as happy, honored, as well as a bit of there is also a hint of pride uh, beneath all of this, because most of the people who are associated with Qafila, I have had the privilege of teaching them in when they were in their masters. So, with that kind of a hint of pride, I would really like to thank the organizers in Qafila for organizing all of this. So that's the, and also, of course, I was not expecting that there will be a bit of an advertisement for my book. For that also, I need to thank them. So, thank you for that. And so let's I think we can start with the actual topic of the workshop, which is on critical writing. As Sheena has pointed out, we will be having it in these three. The basic structure of it is in these three parts. Uh, she has already said what these parts constitute of. Let me just sum it up in a word. The first section is to do with the concept of criticality. The second section, we will take up one particular text in order to have some kind of an practical engagement, concrete practical engagement. And then, of course, in the best of traditions, will have most of the time ought to be devoted to the discussion. So a kind of a abstract engagement, a concrete engagement, of criticality, which is that criticality, though many might think is to do with speculative and abstract thinking, but there is something. So we are already in the domain of criticality, because criticality is at its heart. There cannot be any critical thinking or critical writing without a kind of a concrete engagement with reality, a kind of a practical part of criticality. It is not simply a question of theory. It is also a question of practice. And this is what we will be talking about, these concepts of theory and practice in the beginning of the talk. So this is the structure. Okay. Also, if anybody has, at this stage only, anybody has any doubt or any kind of any elaboration that anybody needs, at least you can ask. Feel free to interrupt me and ask at least. If I can't, if I can't respond at this stage while I am talking about the particular themes and topics, then I will keep that in mind and try to respond to it by the end of the lecture during the discussion. But there is all good vibrant discussions happen out of interruption, and there is no privileged continuity that we have to maintain. So please do interrupt. These are the two things I thought I'll tell you before we begin. Okay, so it's what? It's 5:23 now. So I'll speak, say, for around 40 minutes till 6 o'clock, and then we will have a 10 minutes break and so on and so forth. थोड़ा इधर उधर होता है तो देख लेंगे. Okay, so critical writing, that is what this workshop is supposed to be about. No? Now, see, where to begin when we talk about critical writing? No, because critical writing is something which has become, if we are in the domain of research, then it has become a kind of a necessity. No? One needs to publish, one needs to, whichever discipline you are coming from, psychology or arts and aesthetics or history or philosophy or whatever, you need to, basically there has been a growing demand for publication. And this growing demand for publication is part of a general tendency of which is part of a larger industry, which is that of academics. So, so there is a certain there is a certain demand for critical writing, like any other kind of a product. Like because it has more and more started to function like a market. But if there is anything that critical writing resists, it is this logic of this logic of production, but production which is to be consumed. It is a question of production, because like anything else, it is to be produced. Critical writing is also something which has to be produced, but production को हम लोग और एक word से जान सकते हैं. We can understand production from through another kind of another lens, which is that of creation. Production is also an act of creation, and critical writing has an intrinsic relationship with this creativity. But as you can understand, more and more creativity is something which has come into the domain of a market, which is where it has become something which is to be produced in order to be consumed. This is something which I have to say in the very beginning. So this is not something which we will try to, we'll even try to give you the exact rules and regulations, the exact knowledge paradigm, the parameters of how to produce a critical product, a writing product which is supposed to be critical. That cannot happen, and why that cannot happen must be the very beginning of our our effort to understand criticality. Why is it that criticality cannot be something which can be consumed? So this is something which is very interesting, because we see one of the things, and hopefully we will be able to shed some light on it, is that the essence of critical writing, and there cannot be any critical writing without critical thinking, because critical writing is only an expression of critical thinking. There cannot be any critical writing or critical thinking which is simply which is simply it can't exactly, it is the very essence of critical thinking is to think autonomously. That is what we will try to see how that happens. That critical thinking is to think without the authority of anyone guiding you. This is the essence. This is how the idea of a critique comes, and we will briefly talk about it. To think without an authority on your head, without an authority, without obeying to someone or something which is external to you. Obeying only to yourself, only to your own spirit of freedom. So there is in critical thinking, if anything, a spirit of freedom. Critical thinking is in that sense a practice in the art of liberation, art of liberty in that sense. और लिबर्टी का मतलब क्या है? लिबर्टी का मतलब है कि आई will think on my own. Suppose no, I will think on my own without the guidance of a director from outside. I will direct myself. So you can see, that a workshop where I talk about critical thinking, where I guide you to the very principles of critical thinking, is by definition self-contradictory. So there is, in that sense, we have to start from this self-contradictory, this paradox, that there can't be a workshop where somebody guides you to the principles of critical thinking. Because critical thinking, by definition, if you know anything, if you go into any of the critical texts ever written since its inception, what is called a critique, no, you will find this autonomy of uh, this autonomy of thinking, this autonomy of not abiding by the rules of the game imposed from the outside. This is why we should start with this paradox, this kind of a contradiction. जैसे भी ले लो, हालांकि paradox and contradiction not exactly the same thing, but we start from this contradiction, and there you have then two things then emerge. One is that there is no two set of results come from whatever I have spoken till now, whatever I have tried to propose till now. Uh, one set of proposal is that there can't be any set of rules, because the whole point of critical thinking is to question rules, question given rules of writing, given rules of thinking, so to question rules, to challenge rules. No, but that doesn't mean that critical writing is completely chaotic. No, if anything, it is not. It is absolutely systematic, which has its own internal rules. So that is something we will try to talk about in this first part. What is this idea of developing one's own rules of thinking and writing? That is one thing that you have to, in that sense, challenge, question existent forms of rules of writing. Not just writing, all of this is a question of thinking, rules of thinking. So that is one set, and the other set is, as I said, the whole point is that that criticality in that sense is something which is not simply, you know it is not, it is something which has to be, which is, if it is not a defined set of rules, अच्छा ये rules है, ये करना है, अगर ये नहीं है, then criticality is something which is like an, which is what, which is like an unfolding or becoming conscious of one's capacity of writing, of thinking. So criticality, to put it very simply, criticality is to become conscious of a capacity that you already have, to become conscious of your potentiality, to what of a certain possibility that is already there in you. You become conscious of that. So it's a form of consciousness. And here, I think, a good analogy, from popular culture is a very interesting way to enter this domain. So I hope most of you have seen the film Matrix, the old one, Matrix. And if you haven't seen the film, I don't want to ruin the film for you, but some portion of ruination is there if we have to talk about the relationship between that film and what we are talking about vis-a-vis criticality. Anyway, the point is that the film is, if you haven't seen it, the film is basically about a guy, Neo, okay, about a guy uh, who is living an everyday life, everyday, banal, repetitive, boring, conformist life, absolutely conformist life, where he is living by the rules in that sense, but he continuously feels that there is something missing from his life. There is a kind of a, so he is searching for something. He is searching for something in the beginning of the film. He is searching for the answer. So he is in a state of, you can say, he is continuously questioning in his head, something like that. So, and what happens is that you see that as the film progresses, that a bunch of people come and they say that yes, this reality, and this is very important, this reality that you are seeing, this particular person who is also the figure of a teacher in that film, Morpheus, he comes and says, okay, this reality that you are experiencing, you are seeing, you are the reality that you are sensually experiencing, the knowledge of this reality that you have, this is not real. No, this is not real. And he gives him two pills, no, one red pill and one blue pill. And he says that if you take the blue pill, you will go back to this, this illusion, and you will continue to live in this illusion. Okay, continue to live in this dream state in which you are. But if you take the red pill, then you will wake up. No. And what happens, I am not going into, of course, but what he does is he takes the blue pill, red pill, and he wakes up. And what does it mean to wake up in that film? To wake up in that film means that you have the same reality, but your perspective towards that reality changes. You start seeing that reality through a new pair of eyes. In other words, your vision of the reality changes. And as your vision or your perspective of that reality changes, your life also changes. So you transform. So you become a different person. In other words, your attitude. If attitude is a word which, in a way, sums up your relationship with your reality. Tum kya karte ho? What are the rules that you follow? What are the things that you like, or what are the things that you think you like and you don't like? Everything. Your relationship with your reality, which is mediated through knowledge, sensual knowledge, theoretical knowledge, practical knowledge, all sorts of knowledges. Your relationship with your reality is something which is summed up in the word attitude. If it is to be summed up in the word attitude, then that attitude changes. That is, in other words, to put it as a formula, it is a wake up call. In matrix, it is a wake up call. Criticality is a wake up call. Criticality is a way of changing or transforming your attitude. So criticality is an attitude. Criticality is not, it is, and I cannot emphasize this more, and hence a workshop on criticality is to be taken with a pinch of salt, because criticality it is not something which you do and you come back from. It is not your office job. It is not something that you can just you follow a set of rules in your office and you come back. You have a certain sociability with your colleagues, which you have more or less uh, mastered, or more or less you know how to behave socially outside, and you come back to your other reality, which is your private reality. No, it is not this distinction between private and public that you have in criticality. Criticality is something which is a, hence the text that I have given you of Michel Foucault, he calls it a critical attitude. It is a critical attitude. Now, at the same time, and here comes the other problem, is that although we can have an analogy with the matrix, that it is like the matrix Neo, like Neo, we are all trying to search, and criticality gives us a new kind of a new perspective, a new vision onto our reality, through which we can write, of course, as writing is an expression of that mode of thinking, a new mode of thinking. But there is no pill. There is no pill which I will give you or anyone else will give you. As I said in the beginning, a set of rules which, or a set of defined characteristics of critical thinking which is to be reproduced in your critical writing. There is no such pill. There is no such pill. It is something which it is to be done very slowly. It is something which is, and this is here a citation is perhaps necessary. Citation which is coming from one of the great pieces of no, the pill is not important. That is the whole point, that we cannot give you a pill for critical thinking. What is it? If we cannot give you a pill, then why is it that we are having this discussion? That is what we are moving towards. So if we say that we cannot give you a pill, if there is no ready-made, tailored, kind of a fit of what criticality is, or what critical thinking is, the best way to understand it is perhaps, before we go into more conceptual ideas of what is a critique, the best way to understand this problem of criticality is to perhaps look at it temporally, from the perspective of time. And here, as I said, a citation from one of the great pieces of critical writing is perhaps appropriate, where the writer says, what we can't reach flying, we must reach limping. It is all right to limp. These are the, you got it, no? My pronunciations do wonders at times. What you can't reach flying, you must reach limping. It is all right, as the book says, it is all right to limp. Okay. These are the last sentences of one of the great works of psychoanalysis, which is Beyond Pleasure Principle by Freud. Okay. And what Freud meant here about psychoanalysis, and this is again, I will be taking the examples minimally, of course, but examples mostly from psychoanalysis, but people who are joining who are from other disciplines or other areas, you will immediately see the resonance in any discipline, any area that you are coming from, whether aesthetics or philosophy or history or anyone. Which is, Freud's idea was that psychoanalytic research takes a lot of time, and he was entering into a domain of psychoanalysis. And why is it that he is writing this at this stage? Beyond Pleasure Principle. Hopefully, we'll have some time to talk about this text as, briefly. Beyond Pleasure Principle is a critical text, not because psychoanalysis has a certain, psychoanalysis is perhaps the paradigm of critical psychology, not just because of that. But this text is an example of a critical writing. Why? Because this text is something where a new proposition is introduced, which is that of death drive, which is that of the drives, death drive and eros and thanatos, all of that. But the effect of this text is that it seeks to change psychoanalysis from inside. It challenges the existent principles of psychoanalysis. Hence, it is called Beyond Pleasure Principle. No, it challenges, in that sense, the existent form, existent rules that psychoanalysis, that Freud himself had constituted. Hence, it is a critical text. And in that text, he says, but at the end of the text, that this psychoanalytic research will take a lot of time. It will happen slowly. And this is something we have to keep in mind before any. So all of this is a kind of an introduction to what I am about to say in 15 minutes. That it takes a lot of time, and this is something which we do not have these days, because all of our dispersed ways of our dispersion is at its highest, where it is very difficult to focus on one thing, and that is something which is essential in critical thinking. And this is perhaps something we will talk about later on. This idea of focus, this idea of one thing, to stick to one thing, one problem, and develop that problem. Particularly in critical writing, this is essential. Where Freud, in this text, stuck to one thing, which is the pleasure principle, and yet He whole effort was to move beyond pleasure principle. So this kind of a beautiful formalization is something which is essential to critical thinking. Anyway, we will come back to this later, but this temporal aspect is very necessary. The slow development, the slow development of a text also, the slow development of what you are writing also. It cannot happen hurriedly. You cannot write a critical text overnight unless you are Jacques Derrida, who apparently used to write very fast. I am not. Mm, if you are, then that's great. But in general, I'm saying it's almost impossible to do this fast. And hence, because आज के तारीख में and a product is to be produced very fast in order to be consumed, as you can see then, why the analogy of the pill? Because the analogy of the pill is something which is to be consumed. No, literally, the pill has to be consumed. So critical thinking is not something which is open for consumption. Critical something, the whole idea of the process of production of a critical piece of writing is time. This is the first and the most important point, which is time. You give it enough time, it happens. And what is enough time and all, I'm not going into a quantified कि एक दिन लगता है या एक महीना या एक साल या एक one life. But the idea of slowness is something which is essential. That is the first thing. And the second thing is that temporal aspect is something which I wanted to begin with. And hopefully I'll end it also with this temporal, this idea of criticality and time. Okay. I'll try to finish also this conceptual part of critical thinking with that. The second part, quickly, is as I said before. No, critical thinking has a long history. Okay. Today, what we are talking about, critical thinking has many trajectories. But one thing that critical thinking, all forms of critical thinking, so quickly, if you see very quickly, when doing a lot of disservice to a lot of modes of thinking, Western particularly Western thinking, you see that you have, for example, one trajectory which is coming from Marx. No, so you have critique of political economy. You have critique of Hegel's philosophy of rights. Critique is something which is essential to a Marxist mode of thinking. Okay. So from Marx, you have something like the Frankfurt School and the Marxist people who were, who were, putting Marx and Freud together. Like, say, for example, Herbert Marcuse, who wrote One Dimensional Man, Eros, that book on Eros and Civilization, I think is called. All of that. That is one mode of critical thinking, from Marx to the Frankfurt School up to the up to the post-Marxists. You have this tendency. Then, of course, there are other tendencies, like, for example, deconstruction is also. So you have something like phenomenology, Husserl. Then you have Heidegger. Then you have people like deconstructionists like Derrida, where they also followed a certain critical. Derrida would always say that he is a critical mode of thinking. That another. Then you have, of course, the one mode that we are more or less going to follow, which is Foucault's genealogical, which harks back to Nietzsche. That is also another mode of critical thinking. But you see, no, what happens here? These are all very different forms of philosophies. And in our academic terms, the word that is thrown around and that is hardly, I can't, make sense of it anymore. I couldn't make sense of it when I was a student also, which is methodology. So criticality is not methodology. It has, so if you say, for example, that say psychoanalysis is a form of methodology, you have a psychoanalytic approach, then psychoanalysis is a form of critical thinking. So is phenomenology, so is hermeneutics, so is all of these different philosophical, philosophical and traditions and modes of thinking. Marxist, that's another methodology. Say. So criticality should not be reduced to methodology. Criticality is something which you find in all of these different methodological domains. No? So it goes back to, for example, someone like Kant. No? And in Kant, you have, for example, the first of the great, the use of the word critique of pure, his great books, no? Critique of pure reason, critique of practical reason, critique of judgment. And this trajectory is something which is the critical trajectory in that sense. That's very briefly I am saying all of this. But one thing that you will find, and this is what Foucault points out in the text that I have given you, and just as a kind of a supplement, the text that I have given you is called "What is Critique?" No, there is another text which is a kind of a sequel text to this, which is called "What is Enlightenment?" That is a bit of an easier text than this "What is a Critique?" text. So, if you are interested in knowing this history from a ideological perspective, at least, that is, you can also check out that text called "What is Enlightenment?" by Foucault. It is there in the book Foucault Reader, apart from many other places also. Anyway, so this is more or less this Foucauldian kind of a trajectory, which we will take very minimally, just to talk about the basic conceptual framework of what is a critique in another 10 minutes or so. So just to put it very briefly, Kant in another Kant says in one of text called "What is Enlightenment?" the text that Foucault takes up in What is Critique, where Kant gives certain ideas which Foucault develops. I'm not going into all of that, but the basic thing that Foucault says, drawing from Kant, is that from the 15th 16th century, with the collapse of the earlier forms of power structures, earlier forms, which is when the West was emerging out of a Christian consciousness, Christian medieval consciousness से जब एक modern consciousness के तरफ बढ़ रहा था West में, there was a more and more you found an idea of the necessity of governing things, how to govern people, how to govern government, govern, you know what govern, how to organize that. To put it very simply, how to regulate, organize in order to govern, and not just in terms of political government, okay? Not just in terms of how the state governs, but in a very general sense, if you think how to govern one's life, how to govern a family, how to govern a city, how to govern the mad, how to govern the, what are the rules and regulations that one must follow, regulative um, regulative task. That is what a government, the art of governing means, how to regulate in certain sense. And this idea of government, this idea of governing, is something that Foucault argues is the very condition out of which a critical spirit develops, emerges, you can say. Okay, जहाँ पे there was a more and more emphasis on how to govern, what are the rules to follow, what are the regulations, which we will have to follow in order, how to govern your, say for example, take a very immediate example, what do you mean by governing, not from a grand political perspective, but an everyday perspective. How do you govern your day? If I say, that is when you wake up, how do you regulate the hours, how do you arrange the hours? That is also a form of governing. What are the rules? So you say, for example, you have to stay healthy, so you have to wake up and drink 2 glasses of water and then have coffee with ghee, which is a very happening thing these days, apparently, they tell me. So that is a form of governing. uh, Evolve and development, okay, I'll keep that in mind. Yeah, keto coffee. So so all of these are what they are regulations, they are rules that you are following in order to organize your day. So like that, this is what Foucault calls government. To put it very reductively, but simply, it is called governmentality. Foucault calls governmentality. And critique and criticality is a spirit which emerges out of this condition of governmentality, where critique is where one says, why should I be governed like this? Right? Critique is a kind of a challenge. Critique is that which questions the rules. Critique is where I say, it doesn't mean that I want my day to be completely unorganized. But I say, okay, why is it that I have to have, okay, if you are taking this keto coffee example, a horrible example, but otherwise, why is it that I have to drink this and not something else? Why is it that I have to, they say, waking up at 5 o'clock? Why is it at 5 o'clock and not 6 o'clock? Something like that. Why is it that I have to be governed like this? So, the definition that Foucault, drawing from Kant, gives is that not to be governed so much, quite like that, not to be governed quite like that. That is the essence of a critique. That is the essence of a critical thinking. And it is something which is the only way that you can, have a kind of a general idea of a critique, because it is a this is an ethos, this is, this is an attitude, this is a way of dealing not with this thing or that thing, it is a way of dealing with the world. Whatever rules are given to me, you pose a problem. So here comes the other formation, which is that a critique, any form of criticality, is dependent on posing problems. You pose a problem to what is given to you rather than you naively and immediately reproducing it. तो तुम्हें बोला गया कि तुम्हें health is perhaps the best example. तुम्हें बोला गया कि you have science says these kind of logistics says that antidepressants help because it is scientific. No. So you reproduce it. Yes, it is scientific, you take it. Or you say that why is it that I have to believe this just because they are saying that this is science? What is it? What is the rationale behind it that claims that it is actually logical to take it? What is the rationale behind psychopharmacy? Or is rationalization, this rationalization, is it something which is valid, or is it something which is imposed on me from outside? No. Is it a truth forever that yes, we are actually progressing, or is it something which is I have to see it for myself? So that is what, that is challenging scientific rationality of psychopharmacy today. That is creating a problem. That is problematization. That is a critique of a particular thing, which is psychopharmacy. That is a critique of as postmodern feminist thinking. Yes, yes, yes. Of course, they are all forms of critical thinking. We are going into something, so you understand. So thanks, Anshul, for that. So critique, you see, no. Now another effect of this kind of reasoning, and I'll just end with this: that you can have a critique of many things. So I can, so say, take feminism for example. So I can have a critique of patriarchy. No? I can have a critique of, so I'll tell you, critique of feminism. So not a critique of feminism. Feminism as a methodology, whatever. Feminism as a form of critique. So I have a critique of patriarchy. No? Now a critique of patriarchy is different, no, than say a critique of caste. Castes. No, of course, they are different. There are different forms of analysis. One is the structure of patriarchy, the other is the structure of caste. There are different domains, but they are both critiques. So they have a different methodology. They have a different, everything is different, but they're both critiques. So you have a problem in defining what is a critique, because you cannot have a critique without it being something of which it is a critique of. So you have a critique of patriarchy or a critique of philosophy or a critique of, so you cannot have, supposedly, no, then you cannot have a critique without the object of which it is a critique of. So there are so many different critiques. That's why you cannot sum it all up saying that this is critique, because critique or critical thinking is a mode of a practice of something more fundamental than this or that. Because you can have a critique, you cannot have critique which is a critique of, which can be self a kind of a no self explanatory. You cannot have a self explanatory critique. मतलब के critique का मतलब ये है, क्योंकि critique हर जगह अलग होता है. Critique of history is different than critique of a Marxist critique is different than a postmodernist critique. But they are both critiques. No? So ये heteronomy जो है, critique is in that sense, critical thinking is by definition heteronomous, different. No, it's an entire field. So if it is heteronomous, if it is completely, it is only dependent, critique is only dependent on, so that's why it is very difficult for us to have a workshop on critical writing ना, क्योंकि critical writing psychoanalysis का अलग है, completely अलग है than critical writing in say aesthetics. Even ये भी नहीं है. Am I out of time? बता देना यार.
We will have the break in starting at 6:10. We have 10 minutes.
10 minutes तो ठीक है. Thanks. So because this is a whole heteronomous field, na? Hence, in order for you to have a kind of a common link between all of that, this is what the whole intervention hai, Michel Foucault ka, it is a kind of an attitude. Critique is a way of thinking, a mode of thinking which can be of anything, but it is a mode of thinking which is basically creates a relationship of your own self with the world. So it's an attitude, it's a critical attitude. This is very important. And the last point, so the points that we talked about is that critique is basically, it's a question of questioning authority, not being governed so much. It doesn't mean it is anarchic, it is chaotic, but to question the existent form of rules and regulations, whether in writing or in living, which is imposed upon it. So critique in that sense is a practice of freedom, practice of liberty. That is the second thing. The third thing is that a critique is in that sense, and a critique is so this kind of a challenging of rules, this kind of posing a question to existent defined categories, means that you have to, in critique, in critical mode of thinking, you have to produce problems. This is the third point. Okay. तो पहला हुआ ये governing वाला practice of liberty, then producing problems. And then we come to the fact that critique is always something which is heteronomous. It is something which is not one thing. And the fourth and the last point, which I will wrap this section with, is again going back to the question of time. That critique or critical thinking, or critical writing also in that sense, is always in the, so agar hum bol rahe, if we are saying that it is a question of challenging the existent rules, the rules which are prevalent today, now, challenge those, pose a problem to those. That means that critique is something which establishes a particular relationship with your present. Matlab, there can't be critical thinking if you take away the, it is not simply pure abstraction or pure theoretical thing which is happening. You talk about, for example, के अच्छा the Greek word logos का क्या क्या meaning Greece में था. Critical people are pessimistic. We will come to all of that. No, but thank you for that question. Pessimism, nihilism का एक question है इसमें. That's difficult to, but we'll talk about that pessimism का question. लेकिन the last point is that critique means that you have to create. It has to be a critique of the present. That means the critique is always something which has to do with something like your present moment in history. Your present, it has to have a relationship with your present moment in history, and that is as much reflected in critical thinking as it is in critical writing. That is, even if, so I'll give you, I can't come okay, any form of critical writing, say for example, not just, so particularly historians who are writing about, old, about a time which is past. When we say that it is a critical form of historical writing, it then shows, for example, even in Foucault, who is also engaging with history, genealogical method जिसको बोलते हैं, not just Foucault, Marxist historians, same historians जो पुराने, which are apparently not related to your present, they are analyzing it for in the name of the present. That, for example, say there is. So if I say, so if when, say for example, Ambedkar analyzes Gita, the book Gita. It is a book written, um, in the past, in history, but he analyzes it in order to talk about the caste system which is prevalent here and now in Indian society at his time. Although from that perspective, he is now analyzing Gita. He is now challenging the authority of Gita. So you understand, that is another piece of great critical writing, which is Ambedkar's own writings. So he would go into deep into the history of the Indian caste system from the perspective of the present, because caste is something which is prevalent here and now. So you have to have that relationship, and यहाँ पे here and now का मतलब और भी एक हो सकता है, not just temporally but also spatially, which is that the not spatially exactly, here and now का मतलब है practice, मतलब it has a practical side to it. It is not simply simple, speculation in a speculative ivory tower. It is something which is to do with the real of history. Okay. So I think these are the 4 points which we will try to see, engage in more in-depthly, perhaps, in that text which I have circulated, Alan to give us a more of an idea. So again, we are, so something which is a question of, it's an attitude. Okay, it is not something which is critique of this or that. It is a question of ethos or attitude. It is, the attitude is something like not to be governed exactly like this, an attitude of not being governed like this or like that. So questioning legitimacy, questioning rules and regulations, which is also the question of the creation or the production of a problem. What is it to produce, develop a problem, problematization in that sense, not just simply ask a question, but develop that question. That is the third thing. The fourth thing is a certain heteronormity of critique, of criticality. The critique is not one thing. There are many critiques, but what joins them is this idea of the attitude. And the fourth thing is a relationship with the present. Okay. So these are the main points which we will try to more concretely see in one text. And why is it? This is a text which is, in that sense, a critique. This is a critical piece of writing of psychoanalysis. People who say, for example, if today someone is from, say, aesthetic background, you will find that this is not something which is a critique of, from a, it has nothing to do with aesthetics in that sense. The topic is also not from art, but that is the only way that one can approach, you, as you can understand, critical writing, because you can't have a general rule, as I said, of critical writing. You can only have an example. And that example will show, hopefully, we will be able to see some of the moves or strategies that Alenka Zupančič, who is a great psychoanalyst writer, psychoanalysis and philosopher, some of the strategies that Alenka Zupančič undertakes, you can see that they can very well be replicated in other, actually in not exactly replicated, but they can be, they show you a kind of a capacity to think or write a text in a particular mode, which can be used in other topics also, and other areas also. That is up to us, okay, how we see these and how we replicate it in other disciplines, in other areas. But we will be taking it from psychoanalysis, uh, but looking at more of the form of the writing, not just the content of the writing. So the content is from psychoanalysis, but the form is a critical form. We'll try to see if there are certain formal things which we can extract from that piece of writing. Hence, I thought we'll just look at one writing. So I think I will stop here the first part. Yes,
Yes, we'll be taking a break and we'll be joining back at 6:20.
6:20. Okay,
Yes. See you all.
okay. Bye, bye.
I think we can start, sir.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, we should start. Actually we should. So, no, before I move into this section, एक तो है the questions. Anshul actually a couple of very good, important questions, but I'll take some time in responding to it. So I think the questions we will take up, if that's not a problem with people, then in the discussion section only, we will start with these questions. Say if there aren't any opening questions. Okay. So let me then again reiterate what I was saying in the beginning. So there, if we are, we have been able to have some kind of a conceptual anchorage, some kind of conceptual points we have been trying to develop vis-a-vis the idea of critique or critical thinking. Then we will try to test those in this particular text that I have chosen, which is a text by the Slovenian psychoanalyst, philosopher, uh, Alenka Zupančič. If people don't know about her, please read her work on sexuality. Absolutely a brilliant book called What is Sex? Her work on literature, comedy particularly, the odd one in. She has written extensively on ethics. So please do read Alenka Zupančič if you haven't already. This text I have taken because prior to this, so I'll give you just a brief few words about why this text. Because earlier I thought, because there was some discussion, I saw that because there was certain discussion that about critical psychology, whatever that's a very uh, ambiguous term, critical psychology. But for me, critical psychology is something which is almost exclusively the the possibility of critical psychology rests almost exclusively in psychoanalysis. So I thought I'll take a text from psychoanalysis, which is this text, Freud's um, Beyond Pleasure Principle. But that text is actually a very difficult text and a very long text. But it is at the same time an ideal text for talking about from a critical psychoanalytic perspective, to talk about critical writing. Now, because it is a beautifully written text, but also because it fulfills most of the points that we touched upon, particularly this point that it is something which, as I said in the very beginning, it is something which responds to, for example, it is a text written. Now I'm talking about the Freud text, a brief few words, and then I'll come to the Zupančič text. So, Beyond Pleasure Principle is something which is written after the Second World War. So, it is something where Freud not only develops his new thesis of a new kind of a relationship between two sets of drives, death drive and eros, or no, it is called drive for life, eros and thanatos. This new set of drives, which replace the earlier set of earlier principle of pleasure and principle of reality. So the whole uh, topology of the psyche, if the field of the psyche is changed now. So earlier Freud would talk about the conscious, the preconscious, and the unconscious, and now Freud would completely restructure the psyche and talk about id, ego, and superego, which functions with this new logic of entanglement of these drives, partial drives. So this is something which is it is challenging. So this actually responds to Anshul's question, that is, can critique of the self be possible? Of course, critique of the self is possible, because here Freud is critiquing the very self ऑफ साइकोएनालिसिस, मतलब के द साइकोएनालिटिक डिस्कोर्स को ही जो खुद ही एस्टेब्लिश किया था Freud ने, Freud himself had established. He is challenging his own discourse. No? So that in that sense, this idea of not to be governed so much. That doesn't mean Freud changes psychoanalysis. मतलब सब कुछ sexuality चला जाता है या theory of sexuality वैसा नहीं है. It just changes the basic principle, which is pleasure principle के beyond भी कुछ है. There is something beyond the pleasure principle. So in that sense, you understand, right? Okay, it is very similar to, it is a beautiful piece of, you know, critical writing. In the sense that it refuses to be governed by sex. The life, it now refuses to be governed by this this idea of pleasure. Pleasure is not the governing principle anymore. There is something more than pleasure which governs life. Which is the death drive and the complicated relationship जो मैं अभी नहीं जा रहा हूँ क्योंकि उसके लिए तो separate है. And the second point is, it is there, this idea of death drive and all of this is direct reflection of Freud's engagement with his present historical moment, which is the post Second World War and the death and destruction of the post Second World War, where he would come up with the idea that there is some kind of an instinct within the conscious, within the psychic apparatus, which moves beyond the pleasure to some kind of a destructive, some kind of a void point. So that is something which reflects a kind of a response to the concrete reality of the post Second World War. And in a sense, it also creates a scope for metapsychology. With pleasure principle, beyond pleasure principle, Freud can finally take the different parts of psychoanalysis, all the different theories, and put it together. So I thought I'll talk about this text, beyond pleasure principle, but it is not possible in half an hour, 45 minutes. It's separate. We can have an entire 3-hour long discussion on this book, which is becoming my favorite book of Freud. And we keep saying that, which I personally am doing, and which I keep saying, all of this, there is a lot of there is a lot of reaction against psychoanalysis first, and Freud particularly, saying, no, we are past Freud, everything is, we are now more advanced, more progressed, more developed, we are more sophisticated than Freud. I mean, it's absolute, it's not, I don't have words to express my disagreement to this. Go back to the actual text. That's the only way that we can understand the complicated. Of course, there are a lot of reservations with Freud, which has been argued out about his theory of homosexuality, his theory of, but this idea that Freud has to be curtailed for something else. Derrida once said that it's absolutely, because Derrida's whole work is, all of it is directed at Freud. What Derrida is very fascinating. Reconstruction is very fascinating. But think of Derrida himself. He directed all his work, his so-called post-structuralist work, all was directed at Freud, not Lacan. Otherwise you would have dealt with Lacan. Lacan, again, someone who devotes entire thing on Freud. So this is I cannot. If we have to engage in critical psychology, whatever, in psychoanalysis, we need to read Freud very seriously, very creatively, and that takes us to the idea of writing, because these writing, and Derrida pointed it out very early, that these writings are inexhaustible. Every time you interpret, it's something new comes up, something which the other, that's the way, that's not just our genius of something original comes up in our analysis, and that's true for any piece of critical writing that we will engage with. That there is something in actual pieces of critical writing, original critical writings like Freud's, there will always be a sense of incompleteness. And this is very true about the very nature of writing itself. Writing, true original writings are always incomplete. Incomplete का मतलब क्या है यहाँ पे? Incomplete का मतलब है कि it will बहुत कुछ मतलब हो सकता है इनकम्प्लीट का, बट सिंपली एक ही मतलब है कि एक रीडिंग में वो एग्जॉस्ट नहीं हो जाता है। एक रीडिंग में यू हैव गॉट इट। anyone who says he has got Freud, anyone who says he was exhausted, that person is there's something shady about it, that kind of a statement. It is not possible. People used to say when I was in MPhil PhD about the things, some of the people that the Plato, for example, Plato is done with, no, read and done with. This is not, this can't be. This, the whole point of these writings are that they are truly critical writings are inexhaustible. Uh, yeah, so it can't exactly be, it can't, so there is something. So this is the performative part of writing itself. Performative part क्यों है? Incompleteness और performativity में क्या relation है? मतलब कि like a, put it very simply, and I kept saying it in my classes before, कि like a theater, like Hamlet, ना लिखा गया है ना, so once you perform it, ऐसा तो नहीं है कि Hamlet is exhausted और कभी उसका उस play का performance नहीं होगा. The more great interpretation of Hamlet we see on stage, the more we want to interpret it better. And hence Hamlet becomes inexhaustible as a piece of literature. The more we want, and this is true about, not in that sense, but in another sense with great pieces of literature also. That even if, yeah, new perspectives come out. Every time I read, say, Metamorphosis, Kafka's, that act of reading brings out new things. Why is it that new? Why is it that I enjoy Kafka when I was 18, when I enjoyed it when I was 28, I still enjoy it? The same story. Why is it that I enjoy the same story? I know the story. Why is it that you go back to the same story over and over and over again? And this is true about, no, all great stories also. No? And here critical writing is very similar to creative writing. Why is it that true pieces of creative writing are inexhaustible? That means that some stories, are, no matter how many times, it's like the child hears the same story from the mother every morning, every night, but wants to hear because the child knows the story, and yet there is something in that story. Similarly, there is something in Kafka, there is something in Proust, there is something in a great film also, any piece of art. Similarly, there is something in a critical writing which is inexhaustible. There is something in Freud which is inexhaustible. Now, this is its incompleteness. And when we are talking about writing ourselves, this ephemeral thing is very important. How to keep it, how to keep, you can't deliberately keep your writing incomplete. I think this is from my personal experience. The only way that one knows that your writing is incomplete, that it has some semblance of this particular thing that we are talking about, this incompleteness, is that you feel it is incomplete. And this happens to all of us. Whenever we write, we think that we are not able to express what we wanted to express. There is, I still keep thinking my PhD is crap. The things that I wanted to write, I couldn't write. But at the same time, it is not crap. I know it is not crap. But at the same time, there is a sense of desire which is there. There is a sense of desire which propels you to do it again, which propels you to begin again. That is something which has to be there in writing. That is the essence of, not the rules and regulations, but the fact that no matter how good you have written, self-critical, of course, this is a self-criticality, but it is also a question of desire. It is a question of desire which won't be fulfilled. So the self-satisfactory thing is not something which is essentially, essentially a critical expression. Criticality and self-satisfaction doesn't exactly go together. Criticality is continuously, trying to begin again, no matter how worse it was the last. जितना भी अच्छा था या जितना भी बुरा था, so you can always begin again in criticality. This is something which I wanted to say before we go into this text, which is the Zupanchik text, and I chose this text because I don't know if you have read the text, but if you haven't, it's okay. I will talk about it. You can read it later on only if you are interested. criticality promotes growth. We will talk about growth. We will talk about this idea of growth. What do we mean by growth? Growth is, yes, to fail better. Exactly. Criticality's whole essence is to fail better. All your life, fail better. Uh, exactly. So let's go to this text. Uh, so this text is um, firstly, I chose it because it's a very short text. It's like 10 to 15 pages. So if, as I said, if you haven't read it, it's okay. You can read it in after the discussion and all later on, and maybe keep some of the things that we have been discussing in mind. So, uh, but the interesting thing about it is first point, which I wanted to emphasize, and this is something which is, again, it is not something which is exclusive to psychoanalysis. This can be true for any form of critical writing, perhaps. And it's not simply the structural thing के पैराग्राफ कोहेरेंट होना चाहिए या एक ही पैराग्राफ में, वो तो ग्रामेटिकल है, वो तो करना ही है, मतलब वो सब तो ठीक ही है. पैराग्राफ तो कोहेरेंट लिखोगे, मतलब you can't write that Peter was going into the jungle and then say Paul was fetching a cup of water. Paul was drinking a cup of tea. That doesn't make any sense. You have that much. Everybody has that much intelligence. वो प्रैक्टिस से हो भी जाता है और भी थोड़ा. बट द प्रॉब्लम, एक चीज प्रॉब्लम क्या होता है मुझे, ऑल ऑफ दिस आई एम सेइंग फ्रॉम माय ओन एक्सपीरियंस. ओके, प्रॉब्लम क्या होता है ना कि एक पैराग्राफ तो हो जाता है कोहेरेंटली, बट पैराग्राफ आफ्टर पैराग्राफ ना, क्योंकि the mind moves from one thing to another, it is difficult to keep the paragraph coherence. मतलब एक ही this this single unifying link which is expressed and yet developed. That is, something is expressed and yet something more is added every time you are writing or adding a paragraph through the whole length of the text. That is the difficult thing, because that is the idea of synthesis. मतलब अपने दिमाग में सिंथेसाइज करना पड़ता है पूरा टेक्स्ट कैसे होगा. दैट इज अ वेरी डिफिकल्ट थिंग. हाउ टू, while writing, how do you synthesize, मतलब ना कोहेरेंसी रखने के लिए. तो इसलिए people have different methods. Some people, मतलब I used to write very fluently and then see that none of this is making any sense and then add. So these days also I keep writing. पहले I would have a beginning, middle and end type writing. I have stopped doing it. These are all अपने आप you have to find. But there are certain things which are very interesting about the Zupanchik text, which I think is helpful for us, which is the coherency of the text. Because the text and the problem, then the coherency of the text is brought out in the problem that she is constructing, and the problem is like an onion. Matlab, you keep peeling and not an onion, actually ulta. Matlab, there is a core, and then on that core, different, more and more the core is developed into a huge, it's like playing on variations. It's like music. Although I don't know much about music, but people, my friends who are musicians, they tell me this is true for both Western and Indian music, that you have a particular kind of a rag in Indian music, or a particular, note, a particular in Western. But it's up to the person who is singing or up to the person who is playing who can bring out different variations of it. The particular note remains the same, the particular rag remains the same, but how you elaborate on it is your own creativity. The same thing happens with creative writing, at least in Zupanchi. The particular code is actually taken from not even hers, no, it is something taken from Laka. But how she develops that problem through the examples that she brings, through the Tanbazi, yeah, something like that. How she develops the problem, the single problem, is her own creative and critical writing skill. That's one thing. And the second thing is that with that consistency of that single problem, she can move, and people, keep saying, criticizing many of our writings, saying कि ये तो मतलब these things don't go together. Anything can go with anything, in the sense of you can bring into and that is actually your courage and your creativity, how you bring two completely different areas together. So when psychoanalyst Freud started using mythologies or tragedies like Sophocles, it was unheard of, no, in science, and still called it science, no? Still called. So psychoanalysis, why is psychoanalysis such a creative thing? Because you have something like Oedipal complex. So what is Oedipal complex? It is coming from Oedipus. Oedipus is a tragic play written by Sophocles. This was unheard of in psychiatry at his time. This was unheard of in psychology or sciences of behavior. Nobody did this. Freud was perhaps the first person, or the person who used it most creatively. So it's not a question that you can't bring things together, which people, this is one of the rules, that one continuously says, why should I be governed by? And here in this text, Spanchik does exactly that. She brings in the idea of this Freudian, this idea of, a particular Lacanian idea called extimacy. In order to understand, वो तो ठीक है कि एक लकानियन आइडिया से तुम you are trying to understand love and desire. That is fine. Psychoanalysis does that. Psychoanalysis keeps talking about desire. So using a Lacanian idea, Lacanian concept, which is extremism, I'll tell you briefly what it is. But using a Lacanian concept to talk about love is not a very great feat in that sense. You can, and of course, he does it beautifully and clearly. Another thing is clarity and simplicity, because already these are very complicated terms. So if you are writing in another problem of today is this, that because your clarity is, much of the time the clarity is a bit shady, so you hide behind language, because you derive from so many. That is easily distinguishable. If you have something to say, you will always be focused. You will not. It's not a problem that you bring in many thinkers. You can bring in many thinkers as long as your coherency makes sense. But to bring in many thinkers in terms of just to bring them in, just to as an active logic, कि 10 नाम drop करना है, that doesn't make any sense. So that is very important. So you see this book, see this article. There are you see this article now. You see the bibliography. There are like what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 writers' names. Art, just 8 writers, 8 books, 8 separate writers. It doesn't have like a 40 writers. It doesn't need that. You require as much as it is necessary for the problem. That's one. And what is the problem here? So what is the difference between, say, you're talking about love and trying to develop a problem about love? No? And we'll talk about this by the end of it. What is this developing of the singular problem? But let me just tell you the formal structure of the article. And it is something which you can imitate, but that is uh, not what we are intending to do. I'll tell you the formal structure, or at least what I could understand. But it is just one formal structure. You can develop your own formal structure, but it gives you the way her mind works, her the strategy. So what she does, she has 3 sections. The article has three parts. Okay. In the first part, she gives a purely abstract theoretical concept drawing from psychoanalysis. The neighbor inside me, that part, the first part, it's purely psychoanalysis, drawing from Freud, and then Lacan's interpretation of Freud, and then her own explanation of the Lacanian interpretation, which is on the problem of how love is not simply a question of proximity. Now, it is not simply a question of something good, something pleasurable. Put it very simply, it is love is not simply a question of pleasure. Love is also a question of something more chaotic, more aggressive, more violent. Now, this is what the so it begins with Freud's quote on from the Ten Commandments, love thy neighbor ka analysis from the Old Testament. So Freud's analysis. And then what is the problem? The problem is already set in the first paragraph, which is that here Freud's whole problem is that love is not this beautiful thing of affection, this beautiful thing of of goodness. And from there, so from there the problem emerges that if love is not always about good, always about pleasure, then there is a much more complicated idea of love as desire, much more complicated idea of love, which is where love is a kind of, and there she goes to Lacan, that love is what Lacan, analyzing Freud, says is like an extimacy. Extimacy मतलब दो contradictory thing जब एक साथ होता है, मतलब external and intimacy, extimacy. So love is like it's like this, for example, something which belongs truly to us, which is intrinsically part of our existence, and yet it is something completely outside us. ये contradiction जब होता है, मतलब she gives quoting Slavoj Zizek the idea of the object called the saliva. For example, saliva का example देता है कि saliva is like something which was our own part of our own body, but once it is outside, it is something disgusting. It is something which is completely outside. You hate it, but it is at the same time whose origin is our own self. So anyway, again, I'm not going into the content of it exclusively. The whole idea is to talk about critical writing as a form. So the point is that ये पूरा abstract चीज जो she is talking about, this idea of a love as not simply a question of love is not something which is consistent. Love is not something which is clearly definable. Love is not something which is which is easily which is simply a relationship of affection or a relationship of attraction towards the other. This thing which makes love a very ambiguous thing. It is not, love is not simply a question of pleasure. Love is something which is beyond pleasure, and hence the pleasure principle, again, that book of Freud is brought out. Okay? Love is always something which is always to do with something like death, something which is beyond the pleasure. Anyway, ये बहुत clearly और बहुत detail में मैं अभी नहीं जा रहा हूँ, because that is not our intention, but you can understand the structure of it. The first part of it is purely an abstract theoretical speculation brought out from Freud, elaborated through Lacan. No, this is the first part. This sets the stage, this sets the problem very clearly, very simply, with no need of नो नीड ऑफ इलाबोरेट, मतलब ज्यादा लोगों को ज्यादा थ्योरी का ज्यादा डेरिवेटिव कुछ जरूरी नहीं है, सिंपल कोर प्रॉब्लम है. नाउ she uses this problem, and it is a critical gesture par excellence, uses this problem to make a distinction between love as psychoanalysis understands it, okay, and altruism. as a moral ethical category today. Altruism as a political category, ethical, political, as well as social category, bringing the problem of psychoanalysis back into history, the present history, the present moment. This is the second part. So you understand. So if you have to write a critical, like Zupanchi, if one writes this first, the first problem, setting up the problem becomes very necessary. What is it that you are saying? What is the basic problem that you are trying to develop? And now you develop it in the sense of you place it in history. But how do you place it in history? By making this continuous distinction. Because without the distinction, you can't, without this yes, yes, absolutely. It's a concept of ambivalence only. Now, this distinction, sorry, this definition, which is that love itself becomes a problem. No, it's a love itself is something which is ambiguous. No. This is now posed against altruism as the clear definition of altruism. जो हम लोग बोलते हैं ना जो अभी and then she goes into a explanation of Margaret this speech by a person called Abbott, Australian. So it is coming from journalism, from a newspaper, media, and she analyzes that speech. No, she analyzes that speech. But first, she gives a kind of a historical background of this speech, which is it is whatever, but it is from Margaret Thatcher. ये सब neo-conservative एक line है. So neo-conservative speech है एक, no? Neoliberal conservatism. That's what she says. Now these are historical things. No? Now now she analyzes the speech where this person, his name is Abbott, some Abbott, Tony Abbott or someone. Yeah, Tony Abbott, who gives a Margaret Thatcher lecture. Margaret Thatcher, as you know, one of the great conservative leaders who brought in neoliberalism, who was one of the key players to bring in neoliberalism. So Margaret Thatcher lecture में Tony Abbott बोलता है कि yes, one should love one's neighbor. So you see, once we talk about altruism, love one's neighbor, love is no longer simply a psychoanalytic, personal, psychological thing anymore. The moment we are talking about altruism, it is a political thing, and it is a historical, social, socio-historical thing. So अभी यहाँ पे Tony Abbott quotes this: "Love thy neighbor." Yeah, love one's neighbor, but there is a limit. So यहाँ पे the neighbor is the refugee, the neighbor is the other, the foreigner, the the migrant worker, and what is the self, which is the state, the privileged classes, all of this, the upper classes, privileged classes, the majority. What is the relationship of this self, this quote unquote figure of the self, with the figure of the other? See, the speech says it should be of course, it should be a Christian idea because it's a neo-conservative speech. Says we should be good Christians and love our neighbors, but it should be within a limit. Okay. So this limit, this imposition of a limit of moderation, this creates the political game today of altruism, and this political game of altruism is something. This political game is something which now Zupanchik tries to explain through Laka. Again, she never leaves the psychoanalytic problem, the psychoanalytic methodology. So now, historical part, now she explains it through Laka, where Laka had said that there is no problem in altruism. There is no problem in, because altruism, one has not the distinction between altruism and love. This is the problem. This is the problem of the whole of the text. And if I have to write, if anybody writes, this one problem, the central problem needs to be fixed. And you see the clarity of this problem. The clarity of the problem is this. Now, you see, now first the problem is that love is ambiguous. Now, this ambiguous definition of love makes it distinct from altruism. You understand, right? So the problem is now developed. A distinction is made. No? And with this distinction, the problem also, becomes a more larger problem, which is a social historic problem. It's no longer just a psychoanalytic problem. No? And then she goes on to talk about how Lacan had already said that there is no problem in altruism. There is no problem in giving your, giving what belongs to you to the other, as long as the other is in your own image. So this is not a question of truly accepting or truly encountering the other in the other's foreignness, in the true alienness of the other. This is not that. So altruism is where I will be altruistic. The state will be altruistic as long as you abide by, as long as you take up the face of the self. So you pose it in terms of the immigrant question. So as long as the immigrant abides by the rules of the country, he or she will be accepted in the country. Or this is the whole. This problem is the whole basis of, say, something like the burqa problem in Europe. No? The self and the other problem. Okay, now that is something that is the it's like the true alienness of the other is not seen in its true alienness. Anyway, I'm not going into all of these historical complications. Again, we are talking about a form of writing. So from there, Zupančič moves into Thatcher's own. So you see, this is how it is really developed, the problem. So now the Tony Abbott एक मार्गरेट थैचर लेक्चर दिया था. Now she goes historically back to Margaret Thatcher क्या बोलता था about. So she dug up, and this is the historical research also. She dug up a speech by Margaret Thatcher, where Margaret Thatcher also used the word "love thy neighbor." So, no, but "love thy neighbor" in a famous speech where Margaret Thatcher said that the society does not exist. Everybody is on their own. A kind of a speech on which championed individualism in capital. तो वहां पे मार्गरेट थैचर फाइनली बोलते हैं, yes, love thy neighbor, but the neighbor has to also be responsible. Again, posing a limit. तो ये पूरा जो एनालिसिस है, ये altruism and love का जो डिस्टिंक्शन है, ये she is doing this till the end, where there is a kind of a reversal by the end of the second section, where she now talks about not simply the altruistic moment of love, the altruistic moment, which is a socio-political moment, but she brings in a new player, which is the market. So again, another thing is now, another layer is added. So this is the important thing in these writings, which is कि ये जो layer, when you are developing the problem, the bridge has to be coherent. No, so the bridge अचानक से नहीं आता है. The bridge has to be coherent. So how does it develop this? Develop ये ऐसे करता है कि in the last part of the second section, she says that so the altruistic thing is always, within limitations. You say, okay, so the altruistic thing is immediately this kind of a political move to cut down on this altruistic or charity, celebrity charity is the same kind of an altruistic feeling, which is championed today as an ethical, subjective ethical thing. It in a way cut down the state's responsibility to take care of the poor, of the immigrant, because the state's care of the poor and the immigrant is which is basically the idea of a welfare state. है ना? The state's care for the poor or the immigrant, at least in the West, is impersonal. Okay, it doesn't matter who you are. Are you a यहाँ पे Margaret Thatcher and these people क्या बोलते हैं? Okay, if you are responsible, then only will you be helped. If you are a responsible refugee, if you are a responsible migrant, then only we will love you. No, but the welfare state doesn't do that. No, the welfare state के लिए कोई भी अगर है एक पर्टिकुलर इकोनॉमी के नीचे उनको देना है, डोल देना है, एक पर्टिकुलर हेल्प देना है. So Zupanchik says this kind of a welfare state economics, it was already an idea of love, but it is an idea of love which is impersonal. है ना? It is an idea of love which was impersonal. So now you see, not just the political, social, ethical domain, which altruism was in a way representative of. Now you have the economic domain also. So you have ये economic domain में you are entering a new domain, which is the economic domain. And this is the most interesting part of the article. And I'll just finish with this. So this economic domain mein when she enters, she takes help again of Laka, where Laka had said in one interview that as more and more market mobility will increase, which is globalization, which is market exchanges, which is so easy for us to become so close economically to say a person in America or a person in Albania or any other part. What is available, say Amazon, brings us closure in terms of our consumption. So market is a place of proximity. This is what Laka said, that market mobility is a place of proximity. कोई भी कुछ भी खरीद, मतलब अभी तो ऐसे ही है ना कि हम वहां से जो अवेलेबल है वहां पे भी डोरिटोज अवेलेबल है, यहाँ पे भी डोरिटोज अवेलेबल है, डजंट मैटर. So it brings me close to an American teenager, supposedly. But that's what Laka said. The more this kind of a market proximity increases, the more segregation will increase. So you have a black child who is not a black or a Mexican or whatever. Anyone can get a Dorito, but anyone will not, will not get a job license. A Mexican child will not get a job license to work in, America, just like that. The more, I'm saying random examples, but you get the idea that using Laka, she enters the idea of market. Zupanchik enters the idea of economy. And with this move of moving into the logic of the economic aspect of love, she introduces another idea, which is a brilliant move. These are the strategic moves, which is the idea of value in Marx. I'm not going, it's a very complicated idea, which is that of value. But she says, and this is the interesting thing, like for example, in the article, you have, for example, good, GWD, good, ना? Good का एक ethical meaning भी है, aber good का एक economic meaning भी है, goods. So you develop the problem in such a way that these two can be associated, the economic meaning and the ethical meaning. She says that they function similarly today. Exactly like that, the value, which is an economic term, but also value as a self-worth, they can be now analyzed together. Understand? That is what you will find in the last part, which is an analysis of value. I'm not going into an analysis of value, but what she says and what she more or less clearly illustrates is that value, and using another writer, Marxist writer called David Harvey, is that value functions in a very similar way like jouissance or enjoyment function. And jouissance is something I didn't talk about. So when in the first part, she had made a distinction. She had said that love is this ambiguous thing. She had taken help of Laka, saying that if love is not pleasure, then Laka gives a different kind, creates a different theoretical psychoanalytic category for love, which is enjoyment, surplus enjoyment, jouissance, which is not to be confused with pleasure. Jouissance is something which is the kind of the violent, the kind of a chaotic thing of pleasure, of which is beyond pleasure. So kind of a difference between. So love is about jouissance. It is not about pleasure, because pleasure is a regulative thing, while jouissance is a chaotic thing which lies outside of love. Oh, sorry, outside of pleasure. But at the same time, jouissance is something which has a strange relationship with pleasure. That relationship I'm not going into. That is a complicated, but it is something which becomes the condition for pleasure. And this ambiguity is all that the psychoanalysts, great psychoanalysts, expose. Ambiguities, how to clearly expose ambiguities without, without clearing, without solving the ambiguity, but how to illustrate the ambiguity so that it remains ambiguous, but the ambiguity is clear for you to understand. So jouissance or enjoyment is one such ambiguity. Okay. Now in the end, when she talks about value, she brings back jouissance. So this is the most, that's why I took this article, which is the best example of a critical piece of writing. It doesn't lose the thread. One doesn't lose the thread. All of this, one कोई बोल ही सकता है ना, कहाँ था jouissance jouissance में भी इकोनॉमी और वैल्यू में आ गया, फिर वापस जाता है jouissance में, and shows how jouissance and value both have this ambiguous thing, because value is something. I'll just finish with this. बेसिक चीज वैल्यू का डेफिनेशन है कि वैल्यू प्रोड्यूस्ड होता है ना, मतलब इकोनॉमिकली ना, वैल्यू प्रोड्यूस्ड होता है, और एक कमोडिटी का इंट्रिंसिक कुछ वैल्यू नहीं होता है ना। मेरे शर्ट का कोई इंट्रिंसिक वैल्यू नहीं है, इट्स अ बेसिकली लेबर विच इज ट्रांसफॉर्म्ड इनटू, which is exchangeable now, so it is given a value, exchange value. Anyway, ये सब तो मार्क्सिस्ट कॉम्प्लिकेशंस है, बट पॉइंट इज वैल्यू इज प्रोड्यूस्ड. Point is value is produced. Okay, but she shows through another writer, David Harvey, that value के production के लिए, for the production of value, production is an activity. Value production के लिए एक अजीब सा inactivity का भी जरूरत होता है. मतलब value needs also an anti-value. I am not going into all of this, but the whole point is value is a very ambiguous thing. No, and this ambiguity of value and the ambiguity of jouissance, she tries to bring them together. Now you see, na, it's a very daring thing, and hence a critical thing to bring these two together. So, to value and jouissance, and she does it brilliantly. You read it in order for you to understand how she does it. But I am saying the move. We're talking about critical writing and its move. So you have now a circular thing. You have now the central problem returns. But once the same, so you have the same thing. How love is ambiguous. And this is what so many people have complained. And I also found. It's एक लाइन में तो हो गया, फिर 15 पेज का पेपर कैसे लिखे? Love is ambiguous, हो गया. But this is how you write it. This is how you develop the problem. And you try to associate things which seems unnatural for one to associate, but you associate with enormous rigor and precision. You associate an economic concept with a psychoanalytic concept because their structures are extremely similar. And by associating the economic concept and the psychoanalytic concept, you see that both psychoanalysis can move forward and also economic can move forward, insofar as they both can be used to analyze the present condition. So finally, the problem becomes कि ऐसे कैसे हो सकता है कि टुडे एवरीथिंग बिकम्स अ पार्ट ऑफ इकोनॉमी। पहले था इंडस्ट्री के अंदर जो होता था वही प्रोडक्शन था, अभी कैसे है कि सोशल मीडिया इज अ प्रोडक्शन, अभी कैसे है कि इंस्टाग्राम इज अ प्रोडक्शन, अभी कैसे है कि द सेल्फ बिकम्स अ you're an influencer, you are doing some kind of labor, कैसे है कि these were not seen as value, no, these were not seen as something which produces capital, these were seen as anti value। past जब लेजर कैसे प्रोडक्शन हो गया, इन ऑर्डर फॉर अस टू अंडरस्टैंड लेजर कैसे प्रोडक्शन हो गया, लेजर कैसे लेबर हो गया, जो पहले was vacation, or what was that which would give you an exemption from production has now become part of production। In other words, everything is now appropriated by capitalist production in neoliberal capitalism। How does that happen? In order to understand that, you have psychoanalysis giving you a very interesting idea that the inside and the outside in psychoanalysis through jouissance, the inside and the outside, that which is within pleasure and that which is outside pleasure, they are always connected in this logic of extremacy. So that which is inside the market and that which is supposedly outside the market, they are also connected, in this idea, in this question of value. And you have a very interesting proposition. There is no solution. What to do with this kind of a problem politically? He doesn't have a solution to it. कि क्या होगा अब हमारा, when all of our when so one of the things that you can develop from this is how psychotherapy is a form of labor। Psychotherapy is not simply today a form of cure, because it is a medicine, not just medicine, to psychotherapeutic culture is a form of labor। So this is something which, these are things which opens up from this piece। So a true critical piece is always something which opens up to other things, which is, so it is in that sense incomplete, it is because you can develop this further, because in the end she says, okay, it's not that I'm giving you a solution of what to do in this situation where capital swallows everything, but everything becomes a product, everything becomes a way, you write a radical piece, everything becomes a product, that I'm not giving a solution to get out, but I'm giving a way of understanding it, to open your eyes to what is actually going on, to open your eyes to the internal, the structural workings of this, so that we are not governed by it, so that we are not governed by the idea of health, for example, which is also a question of value। And similarly, as much as health is a question of value, क्योंकि health is sold today, health is bought and sold today, exchanged today, health is as much a question of desire, because we want to be healthy, we want to have a certain physique, we want to have a mental health, supposedly happiness, they are all question of desire as well. So it is a question of desire and psychoanalysis, but at the same time it is a question of economics and value। This is what this critical piece of writing brings together, or in other words, it dares to bring it together। लगेगा कि obvious, मतलब ये क्या है, but it is a creative piece of research in that sense। So that, I think, is a good example of what we can do in order for us to develop these kind of, so this is just her example, you can develop it in art also, you can develop it in in other areas also। For example, in history, there was an idea at that time, कि how can you have history of normal people living everyday life, सुबह क्या कर रहा है, शाम को क्या कर रहा है, only histories of kings and queens। But then these people, some people came up and said, no, history is all about what things people eat, so you can have a history of smell and history of food। People came up with it, that's a critical intervention। At that time people thought they are crazy, But that is what critical writing is, I think, at least for me. It brings remote things. It has, you have to have that kind of a spirit, daring spirit of bringing it in. People most of the time say, okay, but that this can't happen. You can't bring them together. You can't associate these things together. But once it is done, no, people do it easily. So magic and psychoanalysis people associate easily once it's done. So these days healing and magic and psychology, they come easily together. But in the beginning one would never. But this, because this is where psychology में science intervene, sorry, सोशल साइंस इंटरवीन किया था, और फिर एक तरीके से ऑल्टरनेटिव पोस्ट कॉलोनियल थियोरी, बहुत हिस्ट्री है इसका, लेकिन देयर ऑल पीसेस, देयर बिगिनिंग हैज ऑलवेज बीन क्रिटिकल थिंकिंग. दैट्स व्हाट आई थिंक इज, आई थिंक आई विल स्टॉप देयर.
I think then we can take a small break before the final Q&A round.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll meet at 7:25.
Okay, so we are going a bit late, but okay, I guess.
No worries.
Okay.
I hope everyone is back. Let us know via chat. All right, okay. I think then, sir, would it be okay if we proceed with taking up questions?
Yes.
All right. So if any of you have any questions, feel free to type them or unmute it. I can see Kushi's questions, but before that, would like to start it up with Aman's question. Aman, would you like to unmute and talk a bit about your question? I know you typed it in the chat, but if you would like to elaborate on it, let us know.
Okay.
Okay.
What is the question? Sorry,
I'll read it out.
Can you please read this?
So it's, sir, sorry, this might sound foolish and ignorant, but what are your thoughts on nihilism and the Stoic thing, the internet phenomena? I never understood the concept.
No, it's not. On the contrary, it's a very complicated. Internet, I didn't understand this. Nihilism and the internet phenomena, in what sense? Can you just elaborate a bit? Matlab, I can draw my own conclusions, but nihilism and very much on the net, that that the digital world is nihilistic. Is that what you mean? Taking the generation. Yes, please. Okay. No, see, the nihilistic part of it is basically because it's everyone going who, regarding this. This is the basic problem, right? That more and more. Yeah, this is the basic problem. Yeah. So, but why is it nihilistic? That one has to understand. No, I think, and the basic thing is, it's not exactly nihilism. Nihilism could have had its more radical expression also, but today nihilism का एक तरीके का एक cynical expression है, और डिजिटल में ये चीज मुझे लगता है, नॉट जस्ट डिजिटल में, आज हमारे जिंदगी में उसका एक बहुत क्लियर एस्पेक्ट दिखता है, और वो तुम एग्जाम्पल से समझ जाओगे. इट्स यू से फॉर एग्जाम्पल, you are always you are always ready to comply to immediate rules. इंटरनेट में भी यही है ना, एक तरीके से कि immediate, there are set of rules, there are set of instructions, there are set of things which you continuously shift from one set of rules to another set of rules. Same goes with workspaces also in a larger way. इंटरनेट में एक तरीके से अलग है, but what is there is that we just have these immediate rules that we follow. No, certain certain ways of socialization, certain ways of so-called thinking out of the box. Nobody really whatever, or so many rules and regulations that you have, very strict rules and regulations in immediate spaces, localized spaces, इंटरनेट में बोलो या अपने जिंदगी में बोलो, वर्क स्पेसेस में बोलो, लेकिन लेकिन कोई overarching principle nahi hai. Nihilism is what? Nihilism is the absence of a principle. No, nihilism is where principle is lacking. Then what do? You get dispersed. No, you can follow this or you can follow that, but there is no internal logic why this and that, both of this I should follow. So the one principle to follow all of this, the only principle for that matter, is basically to be part of the circulation. In other words, to be part of the market. There is no other principle except for being part of the circulation. No. And for that, you follow each of these individual set of rules that we have to follow. This is the form. So hence people are cynical. Hence there is a growing rise of cynicism. No. Growing rise of cynicism, and I think that this is something which is really, this cynicism creates a form of depression, inhibition to act other than what the rules allow you to, other than complying to the rules. No, this is something. So you become highly sentimental. No, so and you are completely slave to the rules. And this high sentimentality is in that sense expressed in our whatever altruism and our, and the other thing is this celebrity lives are perhaps a paradigmatic example of this, but otherwise you have very definite rules that you have certain socializations, certain तुम्हारा प्रोफाइल नहीं बनेगा तो तुम नहीं कर पाओगे कुछ. And it's not just the celebrity lives. Now everything needs to have this kind of a logic of a profile. Everything needs a profile. Profile has become a kind of a democratization of this profiling. But what is a profile? A profile is a collection of set of rules. Now you have to present it in a particular way. And of course there are those, and those ways keep changing without any central principle. So for example, एक चीज था कि पहले बोलता था authenticity में happiness आता है. Be your authentic self, whatever that means, then you will become happy. Then some guy, I think some Czechoslovakian guy or someone came up with a slogan, don't be yourself, be a pizza, everybody loves pizza. No, so don't be authentic, be someone else. That also sells. So then this is what, this kind of a scenario creates cynicism, severe cynicism. No, and I think that is one of the main criteria for inhibition of, you are continuously trying to. So that's a kind of a that's the kind of a nihilism is perhaps not the problem today. The problem is a certain exploitation of nihilism for production. Even they have not even spared nihilism. Nihilism is also appropriated and integrated, and they are extracted to produce. तुम निहिलिस्ट हो सकते, तुम जितना भी निहिलिस्ट हो, लेकिन ना तुम्हें फिर भी तुम निहिलिस्ट बातें करोगे, लेकिन you will still be part of the production. You still do something. You will sell your nihilism on YouTube and you will get money. That is happening. No, so I think nihilism is not, one has to, hence again we have to critically make the distinctions between what is nihilism. Can nihilism have a critical perspective, and what is no? But I agree with you. These are all symptoms of nihilism, and someone calls it nihilism fulfilled. It's a kind of a high point of nihilism. That's true. But because in absence of any affirmative thing, any kind of an affirmative logic, because positivity is not affirmation. One has to be very clear about this. Okay. Because affirmation is exactly this kind of a Freudian. Affirm, unconscious is an affirmation. Positivity is you follow these rules, you will become, you will live till 90. That's positive. You be happy, that is, think positive, you will live till 90. That's a known, a supposedly known thing. Statistics shows that those who are happy live longer. एल्गोरिथमिक स्टैटिस्टिक्स से दिखाएगा कि कैसे चाइना और तिब्बत के लोग हैप्पी है, इसलिए दे लिव हैप्पीली, दे लिव लॉन्गर. दैट्स पॉजिटिविटी, दैट्स नॉट अफर्मेशन, बिकॉज दैट पॉजिटिविटी ना creates its own problems. वो तो मैं नहीं जा रहा हूँ, but yeah, that's one thing. I think, does that answer? Hope that answers you even partially. Yeah.
Yeah.
What other questions?
Yes, we'll go through the order of the chat. So we'll be following the question first by Kushi, then Katyayani's comment, and then the following comment by Anshul and Jaya as well. In the meanwhile, while I'm reading out the questions in the comments, feel free to raise your hand if you want to speak up, or just interrupt us if you
Yeah,
want
just
to use.
interrupt us. Yeah.
Okay, Khushi asks, does critical writing always takes an interdisciplinary approach by its very nature, since everything overlaps or connects in one way or another? Khushi, feel free to add if you would like to add.
Okay. Interdisciplinary approach है, एक तरीके से तुम बोल सकते हो कि इंटरडिसिप्लिनरी अप्रोच है क्रिटिकलिटी में. ओके, क्योंकि क्रिटिकलिटी, बट क्रिटिकलिटी शुड नॉट बी रिड्यूस्ड टू इंटरडिसिप्लिनरिटी, क्योंकि इंटरडिसिप्लिनरिटी शुरू हुआ था because the spirit of criticality is obviously there in interdisciplinarity. Interdisciplinarity का मतलब क्या है अगर तुम सिंपली सोचो तो? डिसिप्लिन, डिसिप्लिन का मतलब है पैरामीटर्स, क्लियर बाउंड्री. लिटरली इसका मतलब यही है. मतलब सिंस द 19th सेंचुरी डिसिप्लिनरी सोसाइटी में क्लियर बाउंड्रीज होता था. फैमिली एक डिसिप्लिनरी मैकेनिज्म है, फैक्ट्री एक डिसिप्लिनरी मैकेनिज्म है. ओके, ये सब डिसिप्लिनरी मैकेनिज्म था. सिमिलरली इन एकेडमिक्स, हिस्ट्री एक डिसिप्लिनरी मैकेनिज्म है. फिलोसफी अपना एक डिसिप्लिनरी दायरा है इसका, जिसका बोलते हैं ना. तो एक तरीके से दिस देयर वाज अ काइंड ऑफ, so in a sense it is oppressive. So interdisciplinarity was an act of freedom. It was to free disciplines from its oppressive hold. एक तरीके से it was a kind of an opposition to disciplinary hold. And this exercise of freedom, which we call interdisciplinarity, which happened from in the 60s, 70s onwards, which is part of definitely a critical spirit. So ये जो सोचो, for example, anthropology and history were brought together. This was one of the earliest uses of interdisciplinary mode. So anthropology, which would look at the way in which human beings live their lives. No, a society lives its lives, everyday lives. And history, we should look at a particular time, a particular period. No, people started bringing them together. So Greek anthropology and Greek history एक तरीके से एक हो जाता है in certain writers. Similarly, medieval history and medieval anthropology एक साथ आके they create a lot of creative researches. This is critical thinking, definitely. तो इसलिए critical thinking is interdisciplinary. You are right about it. लेकिन मतलब इसका लेकिन भी है कि there is a but in the whole of this, which is interdisciplinarity today is again becoming more and more a kind of, one has to critically look at interdisciplinarity. Let's put it like that. Today interdisciplinarity का मतलब क्या है? Does it still maintain or does it still express a critical endeavor or not? is something which we have to look critically. This much I can say, because interdisciplinarity is becoming more and more a kind of a fashion, in the sense of a reproducible thing. कुछ नहीं तक interdisciplinary angle ला दो. हाँ. Interdisciplinarity is becoming a kind of multicultural, a kind of a, it's becoming a cultural thing. Multiculturalism is basically propagated through a logic, मतलब through interdisciplinarity. ये मल्टीकल्चरलिज्म एंड इंटरडिसिप्लिनरिटी का जो रिलेशनशिप है, इसको क्रिटिकली देखना चाहिए. So interdisciplinarity might have emerged out of a critical spirit, but now it has to be looked at critically. And this is a lesson of critical thinking, because as you see, critical thinking emerges during enlightenment. Okay, and enlightenment is seen as the emergence of rational thinking, rationality. So in one way, for a long time, people punched these two together, rationality and critical thinking. But critical thinking is something which, and यहाँ पे अंशुल का that question comes up, के it always will become self-critical. No, so rationality then started questioning itself critically, and this is what you find in such endeavors, like for example, people like Adorno, Horkheimer, Frankfurt School बोल के जो school था, they started questioning the rationality of enlightenment, saying that this rationality became the logic for fascism and Nazism and Germany and Hitler, because it was a question of, because science and rationality and technology led to this moment. The rationalization has to be seen critically. Although rationality and criticality started together. So you cannot reduce interdisciplinary, इसलिए मैं बोल रहा हूँ criticality is something more, although there is definitely a critical spirit in interdisciplinary, but it cannot be reduced to interdisciplinary. I think that is, yeah.
All right, moving on to Katyani's question, and after that we'll pick up a request which is coming up in the comments around readings and where to start with critical writing. But first with Katyani's question. This is in reference to the first part of the lecture. How does critical theory look at attempts to provide solutions, since it holds ambiguity at its center? And if there are ambiguous about providing solutions, what value does critical theory hold?
This is a very good question. Thanks, Katya. This is like, okay, I'll try to I'll try to be brief, but this takes this is actually, thank you. I actually didn't I did not miss it. I did not deliberately go into it because it would have taken a lot of time, but I'll try to be as um, I'll try to cover this now. Also, before it, read the answer is the response, at least partially. The response is already there. If you read the Foucault article, the response is there. But I'll try to sum it up. What does the problem do? मतलब problem always ambiguous होता है. So criticality अगर एक तरीके का, it's not that criticality all the time ambiguous होता है. Criticality is always something which exposes ambiguity, ना एक तरीके से. So problem is something which is never exactly. We are not talking about problems from this managerial, developmental studies या फिर this whole positivist perspective के positivist perspective हालांकि पहले का है, but today this managerial perspective of solutions. We're not talking about problem from the perspective of solutions. Problem का solution के point of view से हम लोग problem नहीं देख रहे, हम लोग problem देख रहे हैं which interrupt solutions, which makes solutions always ambiguous. मतलब कि solution के तरफ हम लोग, solution does not close the problem. What is it that a solution does? ना, analysis which leads to solution closes the problem. But you think about it, किसी को psychosis है, problem है, वो analysis के through वो solve थोड़ी हो जाता है ना. It is something which you work with ना. Hence there is a question of working na, in psychoanalysis. So the problem always remains. No, problem has to be reimagined in a new way. You have to inject new life to the problem. That is the whole idea. Hence you develop problem. So criticality का मतलब एक तरीके से problem को new life देना. But the whole point is कि if you look at the whole world in this way, in the critical problematic way, na, then you see say the solution that is given at one point, if that is not enough and the problem is open, no, and the problem is not solved, no, then nothing is definite. No. Then if you say that the all solution is happiness, for example, but you say happiness is not, if I look at it, look at happiness not from the perspective of a solution, but we look at happiness from the perspective of a problem, no, then happiness is not something which is the answer to all our questions today, which is how it is being imposed upon us कि जो भी हो happiness. तो हम लोग अगर ये प्रूव कर पाए कि happiness today basically means material happiness, या फिर happiness today basically means a happy consumer, देन हम लोग हैप्पीनेस का जो डेफिनेशन है उसका लिमिटेशंस को दिखा पाएंगे, है ना. और अगर हम लोग हैप्पीनेस के डेफिनेशन के लिमिटेशन को दिखा पाए, उसका मतलब क्या है, उसका मतलब है एज अ प्रॉब्लम इट इज नॉट येट सॉल्व, है ना. अगर एज अ प्रॉब्लम इट इज नॉट येट सॉल्व बिकॉज वी शो द लिमिटेशन ऑफ द सॉल्यूशन, देन हैप्पीनेस कैन बी थॉट अदरवाइज. देन हैप्पीनेस जो हम लोग अभी सोच रहे हैं, जिसको हम हैप्पीनेस बोलते हैं, वी कैन चैलेंज दैट in the name of another definition of happiness which we do not know, but at least that possibility is open. No, so there can be an idea of an alternative. Alternatives ka, it will not choke another imagination, it will not end another imagination of our society, another imagination of our lives, another imagination of ourselves. So problem, in other words, to put it very technically, problem opens potentialities. मतलब problem का एक problem basically exposes possibilities, because solutions kill possibilities. Solutions का मतलब है कि ये इसका यही definition है. If love is seen as a solution, that this is the definition of love. Compatibility, say today, one of the things which is compatibility is the definition of love. Then it is done. Then that is, then whatever symptom I am feeling, that although I am compatible with my partner, I am not feeling happy, then this I have to somehow, then this is I am caught in it. Then I will not be but if I look at it as a problem, then I know that maybe this is insufficient, so there is something else. Then I will search for it, then I will look into it, then my criticality will be alive. This is the point. It in problematization, in that sense, is always something which creates the possibility of something else, possibility of a transformation of our society, of our lives, of anything, that we look at it from a problematic perspective. This is the radical potential and the politics of problematization. This is the politics of, this is an act of resistance also. As you can understand, it is an act of resistance, because I will resist this definition of love, or I will resist this definition of whatever, no, of studying. That I think.
All right, moving on to the next question. Simran asks, Sir, in critique, how important is originality? I think when we look to build problems or solutions, we generally try to come up with something new. But my takeaway from this session was that we have to be more creative and curious than original. I'd like to also tie up another question which is coming up a lot is any list of readings, any
Yeah, yeah.
examples that people can use if they're not, if this is their first engagement with critical writing, critical thinking.
See, as I have always said, let me just say about the readings, then I'll talk about, which is again a very interesting question. क्रिटिकल राइटिंग के लिए कोई ऐसे नहीं है, मतलब ऐसे नहीं है, मतलब क्या ये है जो मतलब यू कैन always start with this, what is critique. There is another piece which is by Judith Butler, which is on the Foucault piece, what is critique. You can search it and you'll find it, but they are difficult. But the one thing I'll tell you is two things. One is there cannot be critical writing or critical thinking if you don't all of this is critical. You just find your own area which is interests you. No, psychoanalysis might just not interest you all the time. So if it is literature that interests you, there you will find critical writings in literature also. No, a piece of literary writing can also be can also be a critical piece of writing. But of course, it doesn't fall into the tradition of critical thinking. That's true. लेकिन लिटरेचर के ऊपर भी critical writings है. That depends upon your desire and your area of interest. That's the first thing. For psychoanalysis, you critical psychoanalysis writing, agar again I'll say this, okay, you jump into Freud, you read Freud, which I am doing, which I am trying to do today. Because as you know, I'm not a psychoanalyst. I've not been trained in psychoanalysis. I'm not coming from a psychoanalysis background, but it is something which interests me, and hence I read. But I've started reading since I've been teaching psychoanalysis. So, and the best place to start is always the master, which is Freud. So read Freud, Lacan, there's a lot of that. But I would suggest if you are in critical, but this whole thing about reading, there is some kind of a text which will summarize and give you the essence of it. That can be, I'm not against it completely. If there are good texts, now like this Judith Butler text on Foucault is a good text to understand Foucault. But the text is equally difficult. Sometimes the Judith Butler text is more difficult than the Foucault text. But there are good derivative writings also. ऐसा नहीं है कि सारे राइटिंग्स खराब है. मैं पहले बहुत प्रेजुडिस था, मैं बोलता था कि सिर्फ ऐसा नहीं है. इफ यू फाइंड यू विल फाइंड इट. बट I think the best place to start with is the person. But psychoanalysis start with Freud, and it gives you a certain. But of course, it's a so readings. अगर बोल रहे हो तो I would say suggest is yeah, of course you can start and read Freud, and for at least for psychoanalysis. Otherwise, you can always read. मतलब depend करता है कि if you are interested in psychoanalysis and deconstruction, you have, say for example, Derrida. But again, Derrida is a difficult text to start with. I think moderately okay text is Freud himself. Moderately understandable, not that difficult in psychoanalysis at least. Laka is very difficult, yes. So, for example, another great way of starting Laka, at least I can tell you, you start with Alenka Zupertzik and Mladen Dolar. Read these people. They are very lucid in what they write. Alenka Zupanchik ka book पढ़ो. मतलब if that's what all I do. I haven't read Laka in depthly like that. I have read a lot of these people who are Lacanians. So that's, I think. But if you tell me your area of interest, perhaps more specifically, then I can also tell you. As you can understand from the whole idea of critical writing, कि कोई specific मुझे बोलना generally the Foucault article, best thing to start. There is also another article in a Marxist in the Marxist tradition, which I can send it to you. But again, these are all difficult. It will take a different kind of an attitude. मैं बता रहा हूँ ये सब के लिए टाइम चाहिए. We have to change our experience of time. Marxist psychology. Marxist psychology तो eros and civilization, definitely Herbert Marcuse का. One dimensional man, again, ये दो है. और भी बहुत है. फ्रैंकफर्ट स्कूल का काम बेसिकली. Primarily, you should start. I mean, I would suggest Herbert Marcuse, The Eros and Civilization. That's a great book. And बाकी मैं तुम्हें बताता हूँ. मतलब immediately this is what is coming to my head. And of course, these people again, Rupanchik and Slavoj Zizek. Slavoj Zizek has both a Marxist and a psychoanalyst. There are some other Lacanians also. I'll tell you. But Slavoj Zizek and Zizek का कुछ कुछ काम तो बहुत easy भी है समझना. Lot of popular. Zizek is actually a good way to start, no matter what people say about it. Mladen Dolar, of course. Mladen Dolar is much more focused. But if you are starting Indian context, Anup Dhar का है. Marxism or psychoanalysis ka, that's the only one person I can think of right now who has engaged with both. तो या और भी तुम अगर स्पेसिफिक कुछ है कुछ एरिया देना आई कैन टेल यू मोर स्पेसिफिकली. बट या रीड साइकोएनालिसिस में मैं जितना पढ़ता हूँ मोस्टली दिस स्लावोज ज़िज़ेक छोड़ के एलन कज़ुपंचिक, म्लादेन डोलर. और भी है, मैं याद आएगा तो मैं बता रहा हूँ. Andre Green है, if you are literature में interested, so Andre Green, those are from earlier period of Lacanian, French Lacanians. I'll tell you. What was the question? I forgot.
I'll repeat it. How important is originality? I think when we look to build problems or solutions, we generally try to come up with something new. But my takeaway from this session was that we have to be more creative and curious than original.
Yeah. See, again, these are, everything has to be taken not with a pinch, but a handful of salt these days. Creativity was a very, it was a revolutionary thing. Revolution was a revolution. Revolution was a revolutionary thing in bygone days. Now revolution is Nike's ad campaign. Creativity is everywhere. मतलब you cannot enter a advertising agency or a without being creative. Instagram में creativity. Whole point is, yes, creativity is the heart of any kind of a critical engagement. That's absolutely true. But what do we understand by creativity? And again, a distinction has to be made. That's what I'm saying. And the distinction, I think, is the thing that you are saying between creativity and originality. Yes, it's a very good, I think, way of categorizing creativity. Creativity is different from originality. If we provisionally assume that it is different from originality, then original कोई नहीं होता है. ये सच है. लेकिन हम लोगों को जो पेडल किया जाता है मार्केट में, एकेडमिक्स में, सब जगह पे कि बी ओरिजिनल. ओरिजिनल नहीं होता है भाई. मतलब प्लेटो didn't say single original word which did not come from Socrates, but Plato was creative. He took Socrates' words, which Socrates apparently spoke, and he created a form called the dialogues. That's a creativity. That's not originality, no, in formal sense. Like that, creativity is, in that sense, something where you build upon already given work, already given concepts. And one philosopher used to say that all I want to do is basically, the vulgar word, but bugger other thinkers in order to produce monster childs. To create create something means there has to be some kind of a monstrosity involved. मतलब क्या है? मतलब है कि creation is not reproduction. Hence, Deleuze said this. Okay, I want to uh, sodomize basically other philosophers so that I can create monster children in philosophy. What did he mean? He meant it was a clarion call against reproduction, because reproduction is the end of creativity. For him was the end of creativity, but that did not mean that he was doing something original which was never there before. No, he was reinterpreting. No, he was doing something creative with these philosophers which other people hadn't thought of it in that sense. So he was, so his whole point was to create a new problem, or look at a existent problem from a creative fashion. क्रिएटिविटी आजकल मतलब ओरिजिनलिटी उस तरीके से एब्सोल्युटली नहीं है. क्रिएटिविटी एज फार एज आई एम कंसर्न आई वुड से इज कि क्रिएटिविटी का एक बेसिक चीज है, यू कैन ओनली बी क्रिएटिव विथ समथिंग विच इज एक्चुअली डन टू डेथ. सो इफ वी गो बैक टू फ्रॉयड, then your creativity is tested, you know, because it is a very simple equation. Right? Everybody can work on, take some Freudian concepts, say like transference, and show how in Indian, Indian healing processes, show that how Indian healing process एक तरीके का transference होता है. That is trans and transference को लेके comparative कर ही सकता है. Because that is something where your area is new, but you are not saying something creative over the idea of transference. You are just applying it. It's not application. आजकल ज्यादातर तुम जिस तरीके का देखोगे वो है, you will see application, applied. This is not what we are talking about in critical writing. Critical writing is not application. के transference का idea use कर लिया healing process में. हाँ, तो वो दिखा लिया कि वो ट्रांसफरेंस जैसा है. लेकिन ऑफ कोर्स बिकॉज यू आर पोस्ट कॉलोनियल एक बैकग्राउंड है तो बोलोगे नो, बट आवर इंडिजिनस थिंग इज समथिंग we cannot completely comprehend through the Freudian idea of transference. That's it. That's not creativity. That's what I'm saying. That's like saying we have to maintain our cultural difference from the Freudian Western paradigm. That's the height of your critical endeavor, and you will see this is what is happening most of the time. Creativity is where you say, for example, Laka was creative in that sense. So why, if you are talking about creative writing, why not take the best example? So Laka was creative with Freud. That's the thing. Deleuze was creative with Freud. Critical as well as creative with Freud. So yeah, you have to make this distinction. It's not reproduction, absolutely no. But at the same time, in order to make a little bit of new, मतलब थोड़ा सा, मतलब it's a question of creatively. I think it's a question of, like we said in the Zupanchik article, creatively associate things. Now, value and surplus enjoyment, to bring them together, which Laka had already done, but to do it again in a very creative fashion, that's a creative thing. Economy and psychoanalysis, to associate them rigorously, that's a creative thing. If that connection is valid, if that association is something you can sustain, that's a creative thing. That's not originality. तो ओरिजिनल कहाँ है? मार्क्स बोल के गया है, लाका बोल के गया है. That I think is so you make a little. I think one of the things what we can do is creatively try to associate things which are not seen as normally associated. And this is what a lot of people, I think, at least at this stage, I can say this. And Deleuze, for example, did it. Clinical, medical एक चीज, symptom, इसको use किया था in order to analyze literature. So he talked about symptomatology in literature. Nobody thought about it before that. He associated them together. That's creative. So yeah, so that. What else?
All right, so Anshul has mentioned some comments, but before reading them out, I would also like to invite Anshul if you would like to share them. Otherwise, I can also read them out.
यार it won't be possible अभी बहुत like आवाज है
No worries. I'll read them out, and if you have any follow-up thoughts, you can let us know in the comments. So Anshul
I
says, yes.
I think don't read it like मतलब they can like sir can read it
I
but
can read
like
it.
why
Wait.
to have discuss like it's just just
Yeah,
take up
yeah.
the question.
Anshul's comments is right above Jaya's question.
Lot of questions, sir. Uh,
It
after
starts with, this reminds me of an organization.
wait, I think,
After Simran's question.
after the I have an article suggestion.
No, no, no. It's I can read it out, sir. Should I read it out?
No, yeah, I feel okay. I got it.
Hmm.
Uh, I feel like some non-critical papers or writers would be psychologists who say the paper is sociological, and the major focus would be present. Yeah, yeah, I agree with Anshul. What she is saying. Most of the time, what goes for criticality is such kind of non-critical thinking. Matlab, okay. No, see, I think I got a sense of the spirit of the question. I think I've got it. If I've read the right question. See, this political aspect of criticality, I think, is something which one has to keep in mind. The political and the ethical aspect of criticality. क्योंकि ये चीज मैं बार बार यही बोल रहा हूँ, ये चीज नहीं है जो ऑफ कोर्स हम लोगों को क्रिटिकल राइटिंग प्रोड्यूस करके पब्लिश करना है, वो तो सही बात है, लेकिन इफ यू डोंट हैव दैट काइंड ऑफ अ you need to have that actual political and ethical engagement with criticality. You know? Otherwise, it is not a question of so it seems ना एक टाइम पे था मेरे एमए के दौरान जो हम हर कोई चीज में बिकॉज फेमिनिज्म हैड रीच्ड विद अ लॉट ऑफ स्ट्रगल फेमिनिज्म हैड रीच्ड अ स्टेटस. तो फेमिनिज्म का जो आइडिया था ऑफ सबवर्टिंग patriarchal structures and asserting male agency. So asserting, sorry, male क्या बोल, female agency. Female agency, these two words, agency and subversion. ये मैं हर जगह पे सुनता था because that was what was reproduced. No, but if you read, matlab, without claiming to have read extensively on feminist literature, but if you read a feminist like, for example, one of the great Italian feminists, Silvia Federici, Marxist feminist, that's an original critical writing. Or if you read, say, for example, Adriana Cavarero. So these are she works on Greek mythology, but sorry, Greek philosophy, ancient Greek philosophy, but she brings out a critical perspective which in a way shows our problems of gender today in Greek. That's a creative reading. It doesn't always talk about subversion and female agency all the time. No, or at least when they talk about it, it doesn't reproduce it. Just the reproduction of these words. तो नॉन क्रिटिकल तो है ही हमारे बीच में. तो उसके लिए एक जो चीज आई थिंक वन हैज टू is look at it from an ethical. I would say, not suggest. It's my own thing that one has to live critically. Simple. One has to live critically. Ethical thing is very important. You can't do it without having a critical perspective on everything. Maybe we won't be able. This is the very essence of Kant. जिस जहां से ये सब शुरू हुआ पता है, वो कांत बोला था कि there is something called private reason, and there is private use of reason and public use of reason. प्राइवेट यूज ऑफ रीजन है कि तुम एक नौकरी कर रहे हो, करना पड़ रहा है, नौकरी का रूल्स है, नौकरी का रेगुलेशंस है, तुम्हें फॉलो करना है, तुम्हें पता है, दैट यू आर प्राइवेटली डूइंग. बट तुम वो प्राइवेटली फॉलो करके भी यू हैव द राइट टू क्रिटिसाइज इट, to challenge it, those very rules publicly. That is your public use of reason. Challenge the very rules which you can otherwise. So hence the motto became, and it's a very important thing for us to understand critically. Obey but think. It's sometimes we have to obey, and given the perspective, it is okay. I mean, kya karoge? Matlab, we have to obey the fact that we have to have jobs, and all of us are struggling with it. But that doesn't mean that matlab that doesn't create cynicism, because you can continuously critically engage with it, or at least have the hope to critically engage. Obey but think. It's a great motto of enlightenment. Dare to think. That was one motto, and the second was obey but think. So I think that is something which is, it is an ethical thing. Ethical in the sense it's a relationship of my own self to myself as well as to others. Criticality. It is not simply a critical writing. इसलिए एंड इसीलिए होता नहीं है वर्कशॉप में. हम लोग ये सब बातें कर सकते हैं, बट मतलब यू विल नॉट गेट आउट ऑफ दिस वर्कशॉप एंड स्टार्ट राइटिंग क्रिटिकल पेपर्स फ्रॉम टुमारो. नो, दैट्स एब्सर्ड. That's the thing. Anyway, there's a lot of questions. Can you read, Sheena?
Yeah, I'll read out Jaya's question, and then we'll wrap up the session with Niharika's final question. So Jaya asks, when you spoke about similarity of structure across very different seeming contexts, could you please explain that more? What does similarity mean? The psychic role that thing plays.
Similarity of structures. See, similarity of structures का मतलब एटलीस्ट इस टेक्स्ट में क्या है, उससे आई कैन मतलब द नेचर ऑफ, और कोई भी एग्जाम ठीक है. इट्स अ प्रोसेस ऑफ आइडेंटिफाइंग सिम्टम्स. मतलब के सिम्टम इज अ साइन. तो फॉर एग्जाम्पल से ठीक है, मैं इसी से बता रहा हूँ, जुपंचिक से अभी बता रहा हूँ, जो टेक्स्ट तुम लोगों को दिया था हमने. सिमिलरिटी ऑफ स्ट्रक्चर क्या है? सिमिलरिटी ऑफ स्ट्रक्चर है यहाँ पे कि एक जगह पे साइकोएनालिसिस में ये चीज आ रहा है कि there is an idea of an inside, no, inside and outside. अगर इसको थोड़ा abstractly सोचो, inside and outside, no, तो inside is there is a boundary जिसके inside में pleasure defines that boundary. So pleasure principle determines your psychic apparatus. Okay, so that is the inner, जहां पे तुम्हारा psychic processes होता है, जो प्रोटेक्ट करता है प्लेजर प्रिंसिपल. मतलब क्या मतलब जो भी हो, तुम फाइनली यू विल मूव टूवर्ड्स प्लेजर एंड मूव अवे फ्रॉम अनप्लेजर. ये तो प्लेजर प्रिंसिपल है ना, मूव अवे फ्रॉम अनप्लेजर एंड मूव टूवर्ड्स प्लेजर. उसमें रियलिटी प्रिंसिपल जो है वो तुम्हें, if you go directly towards certain kind of pleasure, then it might harm your survival. So if I feel I want pleasure from smoking a cigarette, then if I smoke 20 cigarettes every day and I get addicted, so there is a reality principle which stops me. Say for example, okay, have a reality check, something like that. So pleasure is something which defines the psychic process. This is what is the inside of the psychic process. Okay. And then Freud said that there is something outside the psychic process, this chaotic outside, where one does not exactly want to protect one's psychic ego or even one's self. One actually moves towards death. And that is what life is about. What is life? Life is about moving towards death. That's one way of seeing life. You're rushing towards death. That is the moment the child is born, the cell, moment the cell divides and the child is from single organism to multiple organism, and from the birth to the it's moving towards degeneration. तो ये एक्चुअली बायोलॉजी से बड़ो किया तो वाइस मैन बोल के तो यू आर मूविंग टूवर्ड्स डिजेनरेशन डेथ तो ये साइकिक प्रोसेस में भी फ्रॉइड ने बोला था देयर इज समथिंग वेयर वन मूव्स टूवर्ड्स डिस्ट्रक्शन द ईगो मूव्स टूवर्ड्स इट्स ओन डिसोल्यूशन but at the same time the ego has to protect itself from this degeneration it has to resist this movement to its own dissolution. That is life. So pleasure as life, pleasure principle as active, it's a thing that protects you from that which draws you outside, and the outside is this void point, this dangerous, external, exactly like going into the unknown unknown jungle outside your psyche. So this unknown jungle outside your psyche, your pleasure principle is in a way protects you from that unknowability where you are drawn to. Okay, and this tension is something which the psyche becomes, Freud said, a nocturnal battleground between life and death. Simple चीज है. उसका मतलब क्या है? उसका मतलब है कि एक स्ट्रक्चर है between the inside and the outside, है ना? Between the inside जहाँ पे रेगुलेशन होता है और the outside which lies outside, a structure है, a particular relation between the inside and the outside. ये समझ में आ गया ना सबको? मतलब this one can at least topological. So it is topological. It is spatial, inside and outside. So when we say कि similarity दिखाना, साइकोएनालिसिस से ही आता है. तो ये जो इनसाइड एंड आउटसाइड का टेंशन है, ये इनसाइड एंड आउटसाइड का टेंशन का आउटकम है, लाका बोला था कि इसका आउटकम है समथिंग लाइक, तो इसका आउटकम है समथिंग लाइक सरप्लस एंजॉयमेंट और जुइसोस. So juisos is not pleasure, because pleasure is the inside and this dangerous jungle is the outside, which is the death drive, whatever beyond. तो दोनों का जो टेंशन है, उस टेंशन से एक चीज होता है, उस टेंशन से जुइसोस का पता चलता है. तो जुइसोस इज नॉट एंजॉयमेंट, इज नॉट प्लेजर प्रिंसिपल. एनीवे, द होल पॉइंट इज इट्स अ स्ट्रक्चर, नो, इट्स अ स्ट्रक्चर, अ टोपोलॉजी. ये चीज एलन का जिपंचिक, ये सिम्टम, द जुइसोस, द आइडिया ऑफ एंजॉयमेंट, surplus enjoyment, is something that Zupanchik associates with this problem of the inside and the outside, is not simply in the psychic space. She sees it in the economic space also. She tries to show it in the economic space with the help of certain theoreticians, economists. कि कैपिटल वैल्यू के थ्रू कि कैसे वैल्यू अगर कैपिटल के इनसाइड है, मतलब कैपिटल ऑलवेज ट्राइज टू क्रिएट वैल्यू. तो कैपिटल अगर है तो मतलब कि वैल्यू जनरेट हो रहा है, हर चीज में वैल्यू जनरेट हो रहा है. लेकिन अगर ये दिखा पाए कि जहां पे वैल्यू नहीं जनरेट हो रहा है, दिस आउटसाइड ऑफ कैपिटल, if value and capital are together, then there is a space outside capital which is a space of non value. लेकिन जहां पे वैल्यू नहीं जनरेट हो रहा है, जहां पे फॉर एग्जांपल आई एम फ्रीली डूइंग माय ओन वर्क और आई एम फ्रीली एंजॉयिंग माय डिनर विथ माय वाइफ, जहां पे वैल्यू सपोजिटली नहीं जनरेट हो रहा है, ये नॉन वैल्यू भी वैल्यू के अंदर, कैपिटल के अंदर इंटीग्रेटेड हो जाता है. मतलब क्या? मतलब अगेन an outside and an inside are not exactly separate. They are again locked together in a particular relationship. Again, a topological or a spatial kind of a logic between an outside and an inside. ये जो outside and an inside का logic है, ये psychoanalysis में and economy में similar तरीके से आता है. This is what Zupanchik does. This is a similarity, which is a structural similarity. ऐसे अगर तुम similarity ढूंढ पाओ, which is not simply a similarity of identity, but a structural similarity. मतलब के मेरा फेस चेल्सी के फेस जैसा दिखता है, ऐसा नहीं है. द स्ट्रक्चरल का मतलब होता है कि देयर इज अ प्रोसेस गोइंग ऑन, एंड द प्रोसेस, मेरे साथ जो प्रोसेस हो रहा है चेल्सी के साथ या एक्स के साथ या वाई के साथ भी वही प्रोसेस हो रहा है. दैट इज सिमिलरिटी, जो अपरेंटली दिखता नहीं है. It's not simple identity. It is not a question of, okay, this you have to understand. It's a process. No, it's an operation. It is not something which is given like an identity. Mera identity, so the the Muslim identity looks very similar like the black identity. ऐसा नहीं है. It's not a question of representation. It's a question of analysis of structures, means a structure which is unfolding. मतलब it's a operation. It's an operation. So psychic operation होता है. जैसे economic operation. ये है. Okay. I hope some of it is
very clear. Thank you so much.
All right, on to our last question for the session. Niharika asks, Sir, do we have some institutions or professionals in India where we can actually work in the field of critical psychology? I feel that there's a dearth of professionals in this field, and I'm really interested in taking up this further. As you mentioned that you were not satisfied with your work in PhD, I don't know about it, but it just reminded me how I would only want to pursue academia further if I had the freedom to work on a critical subject or like-minded professionals to work with.
I have क्या what can I answer to that, man? So you are my friend then. We are all friends. All I can say is welcome to the collective. This is the state, yeah. Matlab, hence, I am so proud and happy that they have opened this space called Qafila, that at least we are having this conversation. I am not becoming a cynical man sitting and thinking what has gone wrong with my life. This is all I can say. Matlab, as a institutions are supposed to have been, matlab, to put it in a very objective way, place like JNU or a place like Ambedkar University. I mean, they were supposed to be. I mean, we got out. These guys are from mostly Ambedkar University. I am from JNU. I taught in Ambedkar. These are spaces where there were opportunities of doing this, and I hope that the opportunity returns. But the way state of things are right now, critical thinking, kya, matlab thinking, everything is anti-thinking, yeah. New space, yes, definitely. Matlab, everything spells out stupidity, which is basic. What is stupidity? A blockage of thinking. And people who have already been established in these, who claim to be figures of criticality, they are not very interested in. For them, matlab, it's already, I don't, cynicism. I guess it's a severe form of cynicism. And I don't blame them also, perhaps, because see, I have a sociability which is primarily with you guys, which is students, people who are doing it in a very, who are still would not cynical, at least. Matlab, if we are in our private spaces, at least we are not cynical here. If we are doing this, I mean, if you are sitting here, 29 of you, for all of these 3 hours, then we are not cynical. Hearing my voice, matlab, for 3 hours, it's a taste of cynicism. But if you are doing it, then we are not cynical in that sense. But yes, these spaces are going very fast, and for earlier generations, I think one has to seriously see how uh, one needs to connect with the earlier generation of intelligentsia who were critical, from whom we have learned all of this, but who at the same time have, I don't know, become very withdrawn. And these institutional spaces, kind of destruction of the institutional public education and institution is one of the reason for that. So इसका कोई आंसर नहीं है, and only answer is perhaps this, मतलब outside India, critical space. मतलब, I don't know, Bahar mein it's bit, I've heard, I mean, there are more collectives, yes, but I am very, very, I can say this much, I am very hopeful about this space for personal reasons also, but also in a general, because this kind of a collective thing might just work for some time. But of course, I'm always suspicious. That's part of my so-called criticality. But I am at the same time, suspicion and hope can very well go together, I think.
Okay, I think there are no more questions. We'll end the session here. But
Okay.
before everyone
Sure.
leaves,
Hmm.
yeah, we would like you to stay back for just 5 minutes. We had an interesting announcement and something other in
Okay.
store as well. So before that, I would
No,
like
but
to,
before that, Sheena, just sorry to
yes,
interrupt. I just want to say one thing. Thank you again for all of this. But also, if anyone has any, I hope some of what I said made sense and will help, because I know that I haven't been extremely, systematic in the way I had formalized this. But if you have any queries or if you have any questions, you can write to me. I think my email is available to all of you. If not, please make them available, whoever has joined today. And if you have anything, you mail me. As long as I have the capacity to respond, I'll respond. Okay, and I hope it had it I don't know, created some kind of a, I'm more and more becoming, because of this session, I became very interested in this one thing which I didn't talk about that much, but between criticality and time. So criticality as a kind of an interruption, as a temporal interruption. So I hope this session also creates some kind of a ripple in our life, some kind of a small but distinct interruption in our otherwise banal everyday. Thank you. Sorry, I wanted to say that.
thank you, sir. Thank you. And definitely, I think, yeah, sir's ID is already there, so feel free to write to him. We'll also be sharing a feedback form if you want sir to take up other topics or any other themes that you want to use this space to engage in critically. Feel free to write us about that. Any improvements, any critique that you might have of today's session, that is also very much welcome. I would like to take a moment to first, thank Sir for generously sharing his precious time with us. We are obliged to you for giving us such an enlightening sessions, and we look forward to more enriching experiences in the future. Before we end the session, I would really request everyone if they can turn on the camera for just like a few seconds to take a picture that we can, with which we can remember this moment. And
Please
after
do.
that,
This is nice.
yeah, after that, we have a very interesting announcement in store. So
Okay.
don't leave just yet.
No, and thank you so much. It's been such a long time. Anshul, I haven't seen Anshul for such. It's so nice to meet, see finally people haven't seen for a couple of years now.
Same here, sir.
All right. Thanks everyone for turning the camera on, taking the picture. Three, two, one. Critical writing. Cheese. All right. Thank you everyone for joining
Please,
us today.
please do share it with me.
Yeah. And I think we have something very interesting in store, since a lot of questions about spaces came up, about readings came up. How do we go about critical writing, critical reading? So I would like to hand it over to Kanishk to introduce our very new venture, which I think will be very interesting for all of you. So over to you, Kanishk.
First of all, thank you, sir. Thank you. And it is my pleasure to announce and introduce the initiatory session of Qafila's Reading Circle, which is called Aporia. And it's more so a pleasure to introduce it in the presence of Dr. Soumick, who basically introduced this term and concept to us vis-a-vis the writings of Jacques Derrida. The underlying spirit is precisely one of what was discussed at large today, that is to read together into the inherent contradictions, paradoxes, impasses that a text suggests in order to facilitate critical questioning and bring forth new creative perspectives. Our first session will be held on 23rd of June. You can connect with us on our social media handles for more information on the same. Thank you.
Wow, great, man. Congrats. This is the really nice. Please send it to me. I'd love to join. If I'm free, I'll come.
Thanks,
Yes, yes, yes.
Simran. Yes, please do join us for our coming list reading circles. They are also on a pay what you can scale as well. You can find more details coming up soon. And thank you for joining us today. Really glad to have you all here and for the warm welcome. Good night and take care. And I
Thank
think,
you.
yeah, Devika has a one last request. So
Uh,
Devika, feel free to stay back. She's has asked for Lacan text, which you mentioned, sir. But yeah, this is the official
uh,
end of the workshop.
no, no. Thank you all. Thanks, all of you, for letting me speak after a long time for 3 hours, if not for anything else. Yeah, I'd forgotten the feeling of speaking for such a long time because anyway, uh, Laka text, I'll tell you. You send me a mail. I'll give you the. एक तो मतलब you can start with Laka's own text. That I can tell you a couple of television बोल के एक book है लका का वो पढ़ सकते हो वो बहुत that's one of the easiest texts of Laka that I have read. Otherwise, I'll 2-3 texts I'll send you. Or the names. Just one of you send me a reminder. I'll just send. Okay. Great, yeah. It was great meeting you all. And if you guys are, any of you are in Delhi, please drop in anyway. Please, I'd love to connect. So I keep meeting. Anyone else? If you are in Delhi, please, and this is a great effort. Please, I'd love to be associated with anything. So you feel free to contact or whatever. Just ask. Okay. It's great seeing you all. Great, great. Actually, we'll meet soon. I'm sure we'll meet. Now that you have this, so we'll definitely meet soon. Okay. Okay. Chalo. Bye. Bye,
Bye,
guys.
sir.
Bye, 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 bye.
Bye,
Bye,
sir.
Katyani. Bye, Shirin.
Pleasure.
Bye, Shirin.
Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
bye, bye, everyone.